Welcome to Dub Zone. We are underway at Allianz Stadium and it is 2v3 as Sydney FC host Melbourne City. We'll have all top 4 teams in action for you today on Dub Zone as we bring you 3 games and all the analysis from the Matildas Cup of Nations squad announcement earlier in the week. A very big welcome to you. It is great to have your company here on Dub Zone. I'm Neve Owens. This is our interactive coverage of the 22-2023 Liberty A-League season. And how good is it to see 3 simultaneous games here on Saturday afternoon. We'll have 2 more kicking off for you very soon. And a big hello for the first time today to Kat, her dad. Hi, Kat.
Hello. How's everyone going today?
Very well. Good to see you and the voice of the Liberty A-League. 3 games to call, so you're back in your happy place this afternoon, Teo Palazzeri.
Yeah, great to see, great to hear, and looking forward to a bumper afternoon.
And after giving me a really hard time when Canberra United beat the Jets a few weeks ago, it's been an interesting couple of weeks for Canberra United since, Grace Gill.
You were saving that up, weren't you, Nevo?
Really
yeah,
I was. Yeah. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're here for the next few hours.
You.
It's very good to see you.
Likewise.
Teo, take us to Allianz Stadium to begin with, because this is a big game for both sides. Let's have a look at the team sheets and indeed the action from early on.
Yeah, certainly a case where the first 25 minutes, no goals, but both teams are starting to find their groove. Sydney FC, 4 shots, just the one on target, but across through the area, narrowly missed by Madison Haley. Probably the best chance for either team to score. One change to the Sydney FC starting lineup. Kirsty Fenton comes back in, and I can tell you that we maybe have our first goal of the afternoon coming up pretty shortly. Melbourne City, they have no Naomi Chinema at the centre of defence, so that's a big blow for them as well. But Grace Gill, as far as the lineup's going in, it's those goalkeepers that we were focusing on so much. Particularly with regards to Sydney FC, but it's them who have scored first. Sarah Hunter has got us underway on Dub Zone with the first goal of the afternoon with a long shot. So we'll see that in a moment. Here's the replay now. Pressure at the edge of the area. Hunter left all on her own, and it's a great first-time shot over the top of Sally James. And I just wonder, Melissa Barbieri injured and out, watching probably from Melbourne, maybe not travelling with the squad. That would be frustrating to see her team fall 1-0 down.
Definitely, and not the start that Melbourne City would have liked. Sally James, she'll be frustrated with that too. You could see she had a moment of hesitation, was slightly caught off her line, but look, she's probably got to do a little bit better with a shot like that coming from Sarah Hunter.
Just the second shot on target of the game, almost at the half-hour mark. And perfect timing, really. They knew that Dub Zone had started, and they wanted to welcome us with a goal. And Sarah Hunter, who was the subject of a big feature on Keep Up during the week as well, has been having a marvellous season. Probably not in the mix for Matildas at the moment, but very much one of those ones that's been earmarked for great things in the future, and that is her 4th goal in 10 games from central midfield this season.
We already know the power of Dub Zone and Keep Up. Name a player and they will absolutely perform. Sarah Hunter's been doing that. Is that her trajectory, do you think? Are we looking at future Matildas?
I've got no doubt that Sarah Hunter will be in the Matildas national team setup for years to come. She's a fantastic midfielder. She plays beyond her years. She's a young kid, but she plays with such tenacity. She's a really powerful midfielder, and even the fact that she's able to get a couple of goals away as well as a central midfielder, that's adding another string to your bow, rather. But I think she'll be in the Matildas setup for many years yet.
Quality footballer and speaks so well as well, Teo. You could see that from the Keep Up article during the week. She's a thoughtful footballer.
Yeah, I think the real question is she going to be in the mix for the Paris Olympics? So, may not make the World Cup in time, but another year on, is there an overseas move in the offing? Is the A-League Women's getting longer enough to keep her in Australia? That's kind of the burning question. Here's another look at that goal, and just casual as you like, barely a celebration. Interestingly, Melbourne City are playing true to form. They're at 56% possession. They are controlling plenty of the ball. So really the question coming in for me today, Grace, was what was City going to do to test the new goalkeeper for Sydney FC, Talia Franco? 2 shots not on target in almost half an hour. So you've got to say the Sydney FC defence are answering perhaps the one big question of them coming into the game.
And they needed to as well, although they did get the result last week to leak the number of goals they did in the Big Blue against Melbourne Victory. That's something that they would have wanted to tighten up. For Talia Franco, she's a young keeper. She had a couple of testy moments where she held onto the ball for a little bit too long, and we saw Victory capitalise on that. But in terms of this Sydney FC side and the difference we've seen since Jada Wyman's been injured, those opening games that Jada was involved in, conceding just the 1 goal, that was that 88-minute Amelia Murray finish in the opening round of the season. Sydney's went down in that game. Beyond that, Jada didn't concede any. Since both Katie Offa and Talia Franco have been in for Sydney, the Sky Blues have conceded 8 in the last few. So a stark difference, and I think that speaks to not only Jada's shot stopping ability, but also her organisation of her defensive line, how she manages the back three, back four, and how she talks to them and gets them in line. And without her there, it's some of those younger, inexperienced voices that haven't quite kept it as steadfast as it's known to be.
It's such an interesting point, Teo, because in seasons gone by, Jada Wyman's achievements have been overlooked somewhat because they've been half credited to the defensive line and the quality of that in front of her. But you also see with her out the impact that voice missing at the back can have, as well as the skills she brings on the line.
Yeah, and I think certainly a case that Ante Juric has put the heat on his defence both in a positive and a negative sense. I mean, he talked up Charlotte McLean as the best defender in the league during the week, but even though that's positive reinforcement, it comes with its own layer of pressure to perform and a level of expectation too.
Let's have a look at the rest of the games coming up for you in match week 13, some of them right here on Dub Zone this afternoon. This game already underway at Allianz Stadium. We're half an hour or so in. Kicking off very soon, we'll see Melbourne Victory take on Western Sydney as Victory try to stay in touch with the top three on the ladder. And our table-topping Western United are in action today as well. They're up against Perth Glory. And then Teo, a couple of big games tomorrow.
Yeah, Adelaide against Brisbane Roar, possibly a last chance saloon. One of them has to win to keep any hope of the top four going, you would think, unless they really win home in the second half of the season. And Wellington's on the bye this week. You see them down at the bottom of the table, and that's because Canberra are playing the Newcastle Jets, and those two are looking over their shoulder, perhaps nervously, Grace, the wooden spoon creeping up on them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for Wellington, it's a bit of a disappointment for Nat Lawrence's side that they do have the bye this week, just given that the momentum and some of the quality football we've seen come in from this young side. I'm sure they would have loved to continue that this weekend.
We've seen the Matildas Cup of Nations squad named this week, Kat. A couple of weeks until we see them back in action. And, of course, some A-League, Liberty A-League names in there as well.
Yeah, this is super exciting stuff. This is what we talk about week in, week out, these Matildas selections and who we want to see on this side. So it was fantastic to see on Thursday that this came out. This is the Matilda squad for that Cup of Nations tournament that you're talking about, where Australia will be taking on Czechia, Spain and Jamaica in what will be a very action-packed weekend of football. What we do love to see is that Claire Hunt made the team as well, and she has been the subject of quite a few Dub Zone conversations. Our very own Kath Cannuli last week said that she wanted to see Claire Hunt make the team, and there she did. It seems like Kath Cannuli has these powers whenever she sits in this chair. So, Grace, be careful what you say today.
No pressure.
Yeah, you may very well be forecasting something for us. But with all of that said, we want to know who you think should have made that Matilda squad. So I'll throw it to you, Grace and Teo. First of all, is there anyone who didn't make the call up this week that you think should have?
Yeah, well, I think obviously the Claire Hunt was a pretty big and the most different inclusion to the side. And if I'm looking in that defensive line, I think Charlotte McLean, given her consistency over the last few years, I would have loved to have seen her given the opportunity to step up into that environment, to see how she goes. Can she step up the tempo, the pace, the intensity of training? And you only ever know if you're given the opportunity to do that. But I just think McLean has been so consistent over the last few years with Sydney that I'd love to see her in that space.
Absolutely. And Teo?
Look, I keep saying Kirsty Fenton. I think we need a fullback who can be a deputy to Steph Catley that we can trust and rely on, and her level of play is as good, if not better, than any young left back that has come through in the A-League Women's in the last 4 or 5 years, more or less since Catley. I don't understand why she isn't the one that has been earmarked to have a go next, because she also has the versatility to play in the middle and on the right.
On our poll there, we've got Kayla Morrison featuring as well. Just a recap for those of us who aren't completely across it, where she is at, and is she indeed available for selection right now?
I don't believe she is, because FA media manager Anne O'Dong, the doyen of women's football in this country, did get on Twitter and say only players eligible for Australia have been selected for this squad. So cryptic, but perhaps indicative that, paperwork takes a long time. We're all sitting here saying Angie Beard's going to play for the Philippines. There's been no formal announcement. And maybe that's indicative of how slowly citizenship, paperwork to transfer your FIFA nationality, has it hit a roadblock, all these things. Never mind the fact that perhaps on form, maybe Kayla Morrison, as much as I think she is actually the best defender in the A-League Women's, that may not necessarily guarantee that the Matildas are going to select you.
Yeah, some major injury, though, that she's coming back from, and that takes time. Ellie Carpenter coming back from an ACL herself. She's not there this time round, but Kat, she's getting close.
She is getting close, and we talk about the players that we would love to see. So, guys, please go answer the poll. Let us know who you think should have made that call up. The likes of Charlotte McLean, Princessa Beanie. I know when I posted on my socials the Matildas squad during the week, I had a lot of comments about Princessa Beanie not making the cut this time around. So maybe another hat-trick for Sydney today might make a little difference for the coming weeks. But on top of all of that, we also have the voting open for Player of the Month of January, which is another very exciting thing that you guys have all the power to do. So you can nominate who you think is your Player of the Month in the Liberty A-Leagues. And I'm very excited to see what the results will look like for that one.
Claire Hunt there, front and centre, and we'll see the Western Sydney Wanderers in action very soon, Teo, up against Melbourne Victory. The Wanderers side unchanged for this one.
Yeah, and this is a real testament to the progress that Kat Smith has made with this team, isn't it, Grace? No changes to the Western Sydney lineup. Lots of potential candidates knocking on the door of that team as well. Melbourne Victory not so lucky in terms of their ins and outs. As we know, Rika Madsen's guest contract expired during the week. It means that she's no longer there, but they get one huge name back on the bench, Catherine Zimmerman. Great record, 13 goals in 30 games, but got injured with that leg fracture in just the second game of the season.
I'm really almost surprised and impressed to see Zimmerman back so quickly. It feels like that recovery has been just the fastest leg break recovery I can recall, and I'm really excited to see that she is back in for the Victory side because she's such a quality player and so much of her attack for Victory has come through Kath Zimmerman over the years.
One other force change, Gabby Garton, of course, we saw out. Casey Dumont thankfully returns from illness, but also Amy Jackson into the starting 11, so maybe expecting Jackson's combative presence, I should say, up against the likes of Olivia Price, Amy Harrison. Maybe they're more ball-playing midfielders. Victory want to go with a bit of contrast there compared to those two.
Yeah, that's probably a fair shout. I think the name you just mentioned there, and Liv Price, I'm really pleased to see her consistently back in the starting lineup. I think she's a really important cog in the Western Sydney Wanderers wheel, and of course scored that goal last week as well.
It's extraordinary that she's almost at 90 games and we're still talking about her essentially battling to prove herself and get a start in this Western Sydney team. Her level of performance has merited starting, I would say.
I don't think she should be battling. I think she should be starting. It's never been a question for me, but I don't coach the Western Sydney Wanderers, so here we are.
We've seen your lineups make, waves across the Australian football media, so maybe we'll see a head coaching role soon.
Don't talk about the war, Nevo.
The other game coming up this afternoon, Teo, we've got Western United up against Perth Glory. Western United 2 points above City on the ladder at the moment, and we've seen them on such an incredible run, but with both teams playing this afternoon, this game too could have big significance.
It is, not least because Perth have got off the plane and had to travel to Ballarat for this one. Ballarat takes great care of Western United, all expenses paid, pre-season friendly against Melbourne Victory, very enthusiastic about the Liberty A-League, and that's what we love to see from local government. So City of Ballarat, thank you for hosting this game. Now, Emma Rovers is back in for Western United. Adriana Taranto, her turn to be rotated to the bench. Carly Johnson goes to the bench as well, while for Perth, Sarah Kane is in, but Ella Mastrantonio, extraordinarily, still has to serve a 3-game suspension. Perth haven't played since the 15th of January, 19 days, Grace, and only now does Ella Mastrantonio start her 3-game suspension for getting sent off against the Wellington Phoenix.
Well, it's going to feel like the longest layover for Ella, and that's really tough for her to not only serve her suspension, but then also build back into match fitness, which over 5-6 weeks of football, you lose over a couple of weeks, especially. So for Perth, that's tough. The travel is tough as well. Good to see Fun Song Cam back in the starting side because I think she's been really impressive when she has played for Perth.
And this is the stat. 19 days is longer than any break Melbourne Victory spent off with COVID last season. And we think about how COVID totally disrupted the season. Melbourne Victory were playing 3-day breaks all the way down the home stretch due to the time they had off. They never had a break as long as 19 days. So Perth are in uncharted territory for a Liberty A-League team.
And frustrated about it too. Alex Apakis did speak about that at the time where the ground couldn't be found for the Sydney fixture, and frustratingly for a team, you want that continuity in your matches, and when you don't get it, it's really tough to then restart that over again.
It's an interesting one as well from an injury perspective for Perth. After that length of time off, Teo, and then travelling that kind of distance. Speaking to John Aloisi during the Men's World Cup last year, he only gave his players a 3-day break because he said over the course of 5 days you lose too much fitness, we won't be able to recover it. This is a super long period that they've had to deal with. Yeah,
I guess the one advantage that Perth may have looked to exploit is like a full-blown game against boys' academy teams, whether it's 15s or 16s, a tough hit out, something that can, it can't replicate, the consequences of 3 points being on the line, but it can certainly make you work. So I'm pretty confident Alex Apakis, he spoke to the media the week that the Sydney game was postponed. We haven't heard from him since. I think he's gone to work looking for a solution. Perth will absolutely think they should have beaten Western over in Perth, and it really was only Chloe Lagazzo coming off the bench that swung that game. Western United don't have that today. No Chloe Lagazzo again, her foot injury. Tony Gustafsson spoke about it for the Matildas as well. It really is laying her low at the moment. So she's not picking up the minutes, but she's also not the X factor off the bench that Western relied on to get past Perth in that sensational game, the 3-2 win last time they met.
Well, she's been immense every time she's come on for Western United, has Chloe Lagazzo. But you mentioned Adriana Taranto as well, also taking to the bench for this game. Perhaps a bit of load management, because they've obviously got that midweek game on Wednesday. So maybe just looking after bodies a little bit. Emma Robers comes in, so looking for some freshness, and Taranto's there, then available for a midweek start if should she need to be.
We do now have all 3 games underway here on Dub Zone this afternoon. If you're new to Dub Zone, welcome. It is awesome to have you with us. What we do is we bring you all 3 games. We bring you the voice of the Liberty A-League, Teo Palazzeri, to call all of the big moments from any of these 3 fixtures. But if you would like to take a deep dive into just one of them this afternoon, you can do that as well on 10 Play or Paramount Plus, or you can stay with us, talk football and hear a little bit from all 3. We'll also be joined a bit later by Mel Andreatta and, of course, by Kath Cannuli as well to talk about that coaching change in Newcastle this week. I should mention too, the Pararoos game against the USA has just kicked off too. That's a 3 p.m. kickoff as well, and you can catch that on 10 Play this afternoon as well. So Teo, no shortage of footballing options.
No, and I think for anyone concerned about the weather and the conditions, it's a mild summer day in Sydney. It's 13 degrees in Ballarat. It's 21 degrees in Melbourne. So a lot of talk about player welfare during the week, but hey, this week the weather gods have done us plenty of favours.
And we're very grateful for it here on Dub Zone as well as we count down to the final minutes at Allianz Stadium. And it is the visitors attacking. Gosh, they'd love one right before the break, Teo.
This has probably been the most toothless half that Melbourne City have produced all season, Grace. I mean, I'm not going to say we, I'll take responsibility for it. I have talked up Dario Vidosic as a coach quite a bit, but it seems as though his team is regressing in terms of its attacking potency. And even though Hannah Wilkinson has provided some pretty important goals, including the equaliser in the Melbourne Derby and also the match winner in their most recent game against Amy Park, against Adelaide, I do feel as though Melbourne City are losing their attacking edge. No shots on target for the first half here, XG 0.08, and possession's actually balanced out to 50-50.
It does feel as though that momentum that Melbourne City had from the early games of the season has somewhat waned. And I get the sense that Dario Vidosic has been trying to fit the personnel he's got into the side and playing around with formation. We've seen a 4 at the back, we've seen a 3 at the back. Today we see Daniela Galic take to the bench. I'm a big fan of Galic. I think she's a wonderful player and a creative one at that too. So interesting that she's taken to the pine for this afternoon's fixture. But the fact that they're not creating in the final third in the way they used to, we've spoken ad nauseum about it with Maria Cote Rojas and what she provided for Melbourne City. But I think since her departure, we've seen more inconsistency in this City side.
Need to correct myself. Wilkinson's winner against Wanderers. Holocena scored the winner against Adelaide last week.
Forgiven.
Both of them 1-0s though. And I guess, is it a little bit like Adelaide earlier in the season where they're winning 1-0, they're not impressing us? Maybe it's a sign that a drop-off and losing points is on the way. And of course, that's what's happening this afternoon, albeit against a fellow title contender in Sydney FC.
Well, that's the thing. You can't take anything away from the quality that Sydney FC have as well. They're a very tough team to play against defensively, very sound. You mentioned as well Naomi Thomas-Chinema unavailable for this afternoon. She's been...
That's an Ernest Merrick. It's just Naomi Chinema. Don't be fooled by the team sheet.
Apologies. But she's been a really important part of the City defensive lineup too, but rested today with a little hamstring tweak. So whether or not they're just looking after that, not wanting to risk anything, but again, we've seen a change in their formation due to that unavailability.
It's particularly tough on Chinema because the young Matildas have got a couple of games with Leah Blaney down in Melbourne during the Cup of Nations break, and they're going to play against Melbourne City and Western United. As we see Sarah Hunter fancy her chances again there by not quite bending that shot back.
It worked once, Teo. Why not again?
Well, and these national camps, Grace, they're invaluable because quite simply, the youth women's national teams, every opportunity they get, every dollar they can spend on assembling a squad, they are desperate to do it. Like there's no lack of desire to bring our under 17s and under 20s together as often as possible. And to be injured and miss one of those opportunities is a real blow.
And Chittum is an important part of that squad as well, and rightly so. That squad should be brought together with every resource available, and the quality that we see in the under-20 side. So many of them are playing in our A-League women's competition at the moment too, but to me that puts the future of Australian women's football in really good stead when you've got that kind of class.
Speaking of injuries and how that impacts Matilda's selections, there's a comment from EJ, it's on the screen at the moment, saying, okay, continuing from last week, one defender I reckon needs a call-up for the future is Tori Tumeth. Just because she's injured, it doesn't mean she shouldn't be counted.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Crossbar for Rihanna Pollicina.
That's the only thing you're allowed to interrupt each other on this
It's
show.
when Teo turns into an emoji, it's my favourite thing.
Well, that's
why we're here. It's for moments like that.
We were saying, can Melbourne City get a goal back before half-time? And that has crashed off the crossbar. Was it ever going in, or was it only ever coming down? Great little sidestep there.
Wow.
And it's hit flush on the crossbar. So goalkeeper Talia Franco not too close to it.
So 2 things. Thoughts on Tori Tumeth, and also how good is this Man City kit?
It's nice, isn't it?
I really like that.
Look, Tumeth has got a lot of people that rate her because at the Coffs Harbour Nationals when she was 15, she won Player of the Tournament, and then had to really wait until she was, 20 to get into the A-League Women's, never actually broke through in her home state of New South Wales. And there are some coaches out there who've, equaliser? No, off the post and away. Luck's a fortune for Sydney FC.
You're really having to do both things right now, aren't you, too?
Well, we might have to do a bit more, Neve, I think.
We sure will. Let's go around the grounds now, because we have had a goal in Melbourne Victory's clash with the Western Sydney Wanderers.
So, Melbourne Victory in possession. This is CB Smith Reserve in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, and Jessica Nash on the ball here for Victory. Look how lush the surface is as well. It's about to get a heap of traffic during NPL season, so you can understand why they might have left it a little long. Alex Chidiac with a through ball, and Melbourne Victory take a 1-0 lead, and that will certainly settle the nerves. And I reckon it's the 2 best buds, Chids and Beatty Goad, who have linked up there for the opening goal of that game. So Western Sydney's defence cut open, and we see here Alex Chidiac, Beatty Goad made the run, and Grace Gill, good finish, but what a through ball to play her in.
Well, the vision behind that ball, Alex Chidiac, how many times have we said it, the creativity and her vision that she has to pick those passes out. And Goad, she's such an intelligent player, so she reads the run of play really nicely. And Goad for this Victory side has been, in my mind, somewhat underrated this season. I think she had a slow start with the first couple of games, but since then she has just run away, and now she's making it very, very tough for Jeff Hopkins not to pick her.
Well, Beatty Goad said it to us here on Dubzone. She said, I don't enjoy playing at left back. I don't want to have to do it. And I think she kind of got put in that position because she can play it, and she's also so polite that she wouldn't cause a strop about being forced to play in that position. But she's a marvellous left-sided attacking player, and we saw there drifting into the middle to score. I do believe that is her first A-League women's goal since scoring in the 2016 Grand Final for Melbourne City before she went to Stanford. So Beatty Goat back on the score sheet.
She is, and she's just such an asset for this side. She's leading the Victory team in assists, in interceptions, in tackles, in dribbles attempted. All of her stats are through the roof for Victory. So I'm really pleased to see her get on the score sheet too this afternoon.
On the subject of stats, that was the first shot from either side at goal in this game. How much of a boost is that for a team when the first time they really make their way forward into the opposition's box, they come out of it with a goal?
Well, it's a pretty impressive turnaround, but it's so important because in that state where if you start missing those opportunities, frustration settles in. But for Victory to score early in this match has gotten them off to a flying start.
It's a real testament to, as you were saying, she loves that position, and this is a moment for her to really just show what she can do in that attacking position, and scoring a goal. There's no greater display of that talent than that exact.
And for Victory fans, because I mentioned the last time she scored was for City, that's her first Victory goal since November 2014.
Wow.
So Beatty Goad broke through as sort of a 16, 17-year-old, was still in school for Melbourne Victory, then moved to Melbourne City as part of their introduction to the A-League Women's, or the WD League at the time. Went to college, went to Germany, went to Spain. Now, lucky Melbourne Victory, she's back in Australia.
Oh, very impressive. And someone who started that play, Jess Nash, the youngster. Nash, Goad and Morrison, the 3 players at Victory who have played all available minutes. So when you've got that important link-up play between Nash and into Chidiac and then Goad, look, it just speaks to the kind of strength this Victory side does have when they're playing on song.
After the Big Blue last week, how important do you think this potential win for Victory is today?
Look, I think the response in those moments is the most important part of a side's psychology and morale to turn things around. When you do go down in that kind of fashion and leak that many goals, how you respond to that situation is the most important part of a team's mentality.
We saw Elise Kellen-Knight with a shot on goal from just outside the box a moment ago. Teo, she was named in the Matildas lineup this week. We'll have Mel Andreatta on the show a little bit later on, the Matildas assistant coach. And KK, a player, as she makes her way back from a couple of serious injuries, a couple of very serious operations. These minutes in the Liberty A-League at the moment, so crucial in her return for the World Cup.
And look, it's been a long journey, but we know that if there's anyone to take the trust us line on that we can actually trust, Grace, it probably is KK, given she's been named in 2 FIFA teams of the tournament. I know that trust us is kind of rolled out a lot for a lot of the players, especially with the long-term injuries. But I think KK is the one that has too many credits in the bank. I mean, we can sit here and we can assess the performances game to game, and they haven't been flash. But the Matildas clearly are investing, for 6 months' time.
No, in KK we trust, and I think that's a really fair assessment because there's Matildas fans from today that did not see KK in full flight a few years ago before she was hounded with this really tumultuous injury run. And the fact that she's come back and she's getting better and better each game. It has been a slow start for her, but I do trust for someone like KK that she's doing everything right. The more match minutes she plays, the more confidence she gets. She'll return to the player she was, and it's pleasing to see that for someone like that, she is entrusted with that.
And a real leader within this Matildas squad. Traditionally, obviously it's been a lean run. Was it 700 odd days between Matilda's games for KK? A remarkably big number. But you saw that emotional response from the players when she came back. I think it was a game on the Central Coast, which was her first minutes back for the Matildas. And it was one of those ones where it really genuinely felt that there wasn't a dry eye on the bench. They knew the journey that she had been through to get back out there. And there was just such a unanimous kind of outpouring of emotion to see her back at the top.
Yeah, I chatted to her after that game, and she was probably a little bit overawed with emotion and just trying to soak it all in, but she was also just so happy to be back and pain-free. And I think when you've had that kind of chronic injury for the amount of time that she did, to return to a side, and she also commented on the difference in the national team setup from the time that she'd been out to back in it. It had gone in leaps and bounds. So for a player like that, I'm really pleased to see her back playing and pain-free, importantly.
Wanderers trying to create, but yet to fire a shot on goal in this game. But they're looking for a response here as they push to try and cancel out the opening goal from Melbourne Victory. But we've barely seen them down in their attacking half so far. So let's see what they can do as they try to build. I know a lot of people care about my fantasy team, but Serena Bolden, I said she needed to get 22 points last week after I made her captain. She got 2. So off captain, only 1 week. Sorry, Serena. We're back to Hannah King.
I love that the fantasy team's made part of the conversation so early on Dub Zone today, Teo. Usually it takes a little bit longer, but please do keep us updated.
I'm up against Pakua Frimpong this week, and as we know, she's actually commentating the game between Western United and Perth. So I actually think I might be in a bit of trouble, and I might actually finally lose a head-to-head here.
We might have to check in on that game between Western United and Perth in just a moment's time. That's a really big clash this afternoon as well. And wouldn't Perth, Teo, after the time away from the game they've had, as we head to that clash now, wouldn't they love to get something out of this one?
Well, they might right here, because there's a challenge in the area, and that is a penalty given. Well, Susan Fonsonkamp with a bit of trickery. That's Mel Taranto, the only starting Taranto today. Gee, I don't know. I'd love to see that replay a couple of times. And I think Alana Cern may be right to ask questions, but Perth don't care, because Fonsonkamp steps up, puts the penalty past Hilary Beale, who we know is an excellent penalty-saving goalkeeper. But it is 1-0 to the Perth Glory in Ballarat, and Grace Gill, could the upset be on here?
Well, it could be, and what a moment for Susan Fonsonkamp to be given that starting spot, step up for a penalty and slot that away really professionally. Well, that's going to give a young player a lot of confidence, and Perth perhaps not expected to take the lead this early on in the match, but Western United have a bit of work to do there. I
think that's a pretty dubious looking penalty, though. It didn't really look like the most, aggressive contact there from Taranto, and almost like I want to see that again with what the feet are doing as opposed to what the arms are doing, because I don't know, maybe there was a bit of contact there that I'm not giving Bonson Cam credit for, but she's such a tricky dribbler. It's not surprising that she's lured a defender in.
She is. She's invited the contact there. I'd like to see it again as well myself, but it looked a little bit of a soft challenge, but nonetheless there was contact, so it'll be good to go back and have another look at that one.
The ref didn't hesitate either, did she? She pointed to the spot absolutely immediately. But this is a familiar position for Perth to be in, Teo, up against Western United. They don't mind taking the lead against a table-topping side.
No, and I mean, they led twice in the game in Western Australia, and we see here that Western, they haven't put a shot on goal yet, nothing at all. This is actually the first shot in anger, and what a good save from Sarah Langman to tip it around the post and deny Emma Robers. So Western United, it took until the 16th minute to finally fire a shot at all. You see Emma Robers catching Sarah Kane in possession here, and then the little shimmy to get around Liz Anton. That's a great little move there, Grace, but met by a very good save from Sarah Langman.
Well, we did see that amazing shot from Emma Robers earlier in the season, so we know she's got that in her locker, and she's looked to unleash on that one, and Langman has needed to make a good save there.
All right, corner kick coming up. You can see it's a little bit windy. TJ Vlanich to take the corner kick, and this is where Western United, their tall attackers, Hannah Keane, Danielle Steer, they really caused headaches for Canberra last week. Is it the same for Perth? Langman with a big fist away, but the ball's not totally out of the box, and now it is cleared up to the halfway line. So Perth, they've got something to hold on to here. We've barely talked about them over the last 3 weeks, of course, because they have had this long break between matches, but also, Grace, their season, it was slipping away, and they had to go out and beat Wellington. It was a pretty unspectacular 2-0 win, maybe missed out on the chance to boost their goal difference, and a red card for both teams was maybe a factor in that, with Ralston getting sent off for Wellington and Master Antonio getting sent off for Perth. But they just seem to be drifting in no man's land. They're not in the wooden spoon conversation, but they need to string some wins together to latch back onto any top four conversation.
Well, sitting in ninth at the moment, they certainly do. And the question was always going to be, after that many days and weeks without playing, how they were going to respond. So the penalty is a little bit of a gift in kick-starting that response to that amount of time off. So it's a good position for Perth to be in, but we know the quality that Western United do possess.
They've got a free kick here for Mel Taranto, who is going to shoot direct and try and catch the wind, and just drops it on the roof of the net. So for those of you not familiar with Moorshead Park, this actually hosted a Matildas match back in 2016, Australia beating New Zealand 2-0. So it's a great little venue. You can see what great condition the grass is in as well, Grace. It looks like a spectacular setup.
Looks like a lovely field, actually. The pitch and all the grass looks, in really, really good condition. And if it is a cooler day, obviously lends itself to a bit faster, higher intensity football as well.
Also, the way, Teo, you can recall that type of detail from 2016, very impressive.
Well, the secret to that is it was the first time Victoria had hosted the Matildas in 8 years. I think the entire state had been hanging out for them to play a game down there, and they got that game against New Zealand.
Mr. Victoria.
You're far too humble.
No, but I'm just saying, it was a big crowd. You remember when the Matildas fill a stadium, and this was an instance where that outer hill on the outer side was completely full because people were so excited to go and see the team, and this was right on the cusp of that win against the United States and their breakout phase and growing into the team they've become some 7 years on now.
And now we're booking Accor Stadium for the Matildas.
Filling it out, no doubt.
Yes, definitely.
Well, speaking of the Matildas, their assistant coach Mel Andreatta has been good enough to join us on Dub Zone this afternoon. Mel, thank you so much. It's great to see you again. It was good to see that squad named this week too. Let's talk Claire Hunt to begin with. A big in and a big inclusion from a Liberty A-League perspective. What has she been doing this season that has so impressed you and the coaching staff?
I think, first of all, isn't it great that we're talking about defenders and all these defenders coming through the league and competing for spots? But in terms of Claire, she's been someone who's been on the radar for a long time now. This is her 5th season in the league, and even before us, she was being monitored by other national team coaches, and unfortunately through injury she wasn't able to take opportunities she was given. But we've seen consistently high performances with her games, her ability to defend in and around the goal zone, aerial duels, like she's just big presence with her football actions on the field, and then her leadership as well. You can see her really embracing that captaincy. And then let's talk about what she can do with the ball too, her ability to break lines and progress the play into the front half for her team. I think she's been an all-rounder, and this A-League women's season.
Mel, while we're on the topic of defenders and loving talking about them, let's talk about Ellie Carpenter and her return with Lyon. Good to see her back travelling with the squad. How close was she to return in this window? And secondary to that, what are you going to do with Charlie Grant, who has been so impressive in Ellie's absence?
Well, first of all, I think the player is and what's at best for them is at the forefront of our minds. And ACL injuries in particular, you want to be really careful about their return to play. And after a lot of discussions with Ellie, with Lyon Triple SM team together with ours, we decided that it was best for her to stay there. Reduces the travel, obviously, and that was the decision we made with her. And for Charlie, it's to continue doing what she's doing, and she's taken her opportunity and been performing well for us.
Mel, thanks so much for joining us. And look, speaking of ACL injuries, we've seen Chloe Lagazzo come back from hers and come back really well for Western United, and now obviously nursing a little bit of a foot niggle. Look, how are you managing her and her return to the side? Because she's obviously not in this camp, but she would surely be earmarked for the World Cup.
Yeah, again, the player and working with the player and the Triple SM teams from the national team and her club is critical to make sure that we put a plan in place for a safe return to play. And that's exactly what we've done. And together with her and those Triple SM teams, we've decided that for this camp, it's best for her to just stay in her environment, get the training minutes up, hopefully get match minute exposure as well, and take it from there.
That's such an interesting point you make, Mel. When you look at those match minutes and that training environment she's in at the moment, have you given Chloe any guidance? Have you had discussions with her about her return to the US and her club side over there and the impact that a lack of minutes could have on whether or not she can play at this World Cup?
What I can say, we've spoken to all the players, and not just about this window or this year, but for the last 2 years, that you've got to do what you need to do to be at your best. And the big thing, especially given it's a World Cup year now, we can finally say it's the World Cup year, it is match minutes, and it's super important that you're going somewhere where you're going to get those match minutes. So in terms of the discussions that she's had with her club, I'm not sure where that's at, but everyone understands the importance of being in the right environment, doing what you need to do in order to be at your best, and match minutes.
Now, sorry to interrupt here, Mel, but we're just trying to work out if this goal has been paid to Emma Robers or whether it's been disallowed for the pile-up of bodies in the build-up. So we may have to break to take the goal.
Yes.
While we're on the subject of speaking to players, as you know, FIFA requires, same as the AFC, for a long list of 50 to be named well in advance of each tournament. And my question to you is, who is still being sold the dream? Who is on the long list that when you do the ring around of, say, players in the A-League Women's, who are you still saying, stay sharp, don't lose hope? Who are you still telling, just because the squad looks quite settled at the moment, doesn't mean that you're not in our thoughts should the worst-case scenario happen?
Well, what I can say and what we learnt from the Olympic Games, everyone needs to be on notice and fight for one of those top 50 positions. It's still a way off until we need to provide that list. So, we're not at the business end of nailing down names by any means, but I hope everyone knows that whilst there might be a core group or some consistency in the selections that we've seen the last half of last year and now, that there's still the opportunity to fight for a spot. And that's the message that we've been given out.
So I would put it to you, Mel, that players on full Matildas contracts, and credit to them for collectively bargaining for it, but players on full Matildas contracts have too much job security, and if they're fit to appear at camp and train and play, they're undroppable. Is that true?
Well, I think you can see from selections that we've had that it's not true at all. It's all performance based. The discussions that we have with players is all around their performance, and we have individual player performance plans in place so that they keep striving to be better. And at this stage, we have got some consistency in the squad, and I think that's credit to the players for taking that feedback on, to challenge themselves to get to better environments and to fight for those match minutes in their clubs, in top clubs, in top leagues, and it's up to everybody else to try and do the same.
Mel, the challenge obviously for players is getting the spot, but then from coach side, it's trying to manage the schedules and the fact that you don't really get that much time in camp in the lead up to these tournaments because you're managing the schedules of all of these different players. We have a Women's World Cup on home soil this year. What are you guys doing a little differently in the lead up to that World Cup to give the girls a little bit of extra time to prepare?
There's been a lot going on in the background. Fortunately, with Jens based over in Sweden, to get a real understanding of the players' schedule and what it looks like. He's been visiting clubs and talking to coaches, as Tony was doing when he was there as well. But Jens has continued that connection with the overseas clubs, as have Triple SM staff members who are based in UK or in Europe, travelling and making club visits to strengthen those relationships with clubs and get the real detail of where the players are at and what we need to do together in order to get them to be at their best for the World Cup. So I think getting that information and building those connections has been super important. And then, without saying, I can't say too much, but of course, like we did with the Olympics, it would be great to have the players even earlier than the FIFA dates to come together and prepare for the World Cup. We were able to do that for the Olympics, but I'm not privy to where we're at with that preparation camp before the FIFA dates for this World Cup.
We cannot wait for that World Cup, but indeed for the Cup of Nations coming up in just a couple of weeks' time. Mel Andreatta, thank you so much for joining us on Dub Zone this afternoon.
Thanks so much. Can't wait for Cup of Nations as well. It's going to be fantastic for all of us to get that tournament run that we need.
Thanks so much, Mel. We'll see you there for the football coming up, Teo. 3 games. Big for the Matildas in February. We know that they don't get that much time together in the lead up to the World Cup. Tournaments like this, windows like this, so important.
And almost as important as Matilda's selection is the team that Spain select, because they still have their issues with the Spanish Federation. Are they going to be bringing the B-plus team? Are the 15 players that spoke out against the coach and the RFEF still going to be absent? We get our answers this week. Are we going to have Pateas? Are we going to have Bonmati? Or are we going to have the B-plus crew? Hey, still a good team, but not the test that the Matildas want at the Cup of Nations.
And Pateas here in Australia would be such a joy to behold, such a big thing for football fans and a little taster of what is to come in a few months' time for the World Cup. But for now, we should go back around the grounds because, Teo, we've had goals on all fronts. Where are we heading first?
Yes, so I want to know the same thing. Here is a ball into the box for Western Sydney Wanderers, and that is a great solo run and finish from Sophie Harding. And I can tell you that of all players in the league, she had the highest XG of a player yet to score this season. So Sophie Harding, you're off the list. And she's got her first goal in Wanderers colours, and you can see the relief that brings with it for her. And I tell you what, Claudia Bunge has been left behind by the straight line speed there of Sophie Harding.
Well, that's exactly right. Sophie Harding, the speed that we see from her, and that's what has set her apart without that finishing touch, that finishing finesse. So for her, I'm really pleased to actually see her get off the mark. And that's a good finish as well. Claudia Bunge saw the heels of Sophie Harding and not much else.
Now, out of the aftermath of this, no foul was paid on Sarah Langman. The goal stands, and Emma Robers has scored for the second time in the A-League Women's. Of course, she scored the match winner against Adelaide earlier in the campaign. So it's 1-1 there. The team on the top of the ladder are level. Now, Melbourne City, they're having a bit of a bad day. Mackenzie Hawkesby and Courtney Vine, we saw this link up to great effect in the Sydney Derby, and Sally James totally caught in no man's land there. Courtney Vine laughing, smiling, back in top form. You can tell there's Matilda's games on the horizon. And another assist for the Hawk. So Sydney FC are disappearing into the distance. They are 2-0 up against Melbourne City.
That's a really nice finish there by Courtney Vine, and particularly the pass from Mackenzie Hawkesby. That was lovely, the weight behind it, and Courtney Vine, we know she just loves to run into space, and for her, it's really important that she does step up into a little bit of quality and form at the moment.
Sorry, I'm doing the DiCaprio pointing meme because did you see the indecisiveness there between the keeper and Emma Checker? That is exactly what we spoke about on Dub Zone a couple of weeks ago. Melbourne City, great passing team, but the centre of defence lets it all down, and that was a classic example of the lack of communication there. Anyway, they got away with it, and now they've got a free kick seemingly here right on the edge of the penalty area.
Well, from one end to the other, Hawkesby there, putting her arms out in innocence, saying, I didn't get her on that one.
Mackenzie Hawkesby's never committed a foul in her career,
She
Grace.
hasn't.
Just
You're right.
ask her, yeah.
It is that goalkeeping discussion, though, that we've been having. Mel Barbieri out at the moment, injured, and a number of clubs having to mix things up at the back in an area that we don't often see change.
I mean, Sally James was good for the young Matildas, though. She started all 3 games at the Under-20 World Cup. She just hasn't been able to refine that form in the A-League Women's, though, Grace.
No, she hasn't. And again, it's probably a question of consistency. We saw her start at the beginning of the season and then a few games where Barbieri would come on in the last few minutes, sort of 8 to 10 minutes, and Sally James back in, out again with a finger injury, but back in today. So maybe it's a confidence, consistency question for the young player.
Well, we've got the free kick coming up here. Policina is going to spray that across the face, and that is an anticlimax. So I guess this is the fly in the ointment for Melbourne City at the moment, though, isn't it? I guess Bubs is their number 1 keeper, Grace, and right now she's like Steve Waugh. She's 99 not out, and we're waiting for that 100th game. Yeah, no Kookaburra rule this week, but she's probably got a race against time to be fit for finals. And if anyone's going to get there, it's Bubs. You know, we know the work rate, we know the commitment, we know the mental application of Melissa Barbieri, but they've still got to sort of nail down maybe a top 2 spot or fight for their position on the ladder now, because if Western come back today, Sydney picks up 3 points, Melbourne Victory's in a battle as well. They don't want to be sitting 4th and have the odds against them going into the finals run.
No, of course, they want to solidify their spot at the top there or in the top 2 at a minimum. But for someone like Melissa Barbieri, yeah, with her discipline, her experience, I have no doubt she will come back. But we saw her, on crutches just in the last week or so with that calf injury, which is such a disappointment. She's just on the cusp of that 100. And look, I've no doubt she'll get there. It's just a question of how soon.
Frustrating for her as well, Teo. We spoke to her just a couple of weeks ago. I think she was on 98 at the time, about the countdown to the century. I mean, Kat,
are we
you were
going
present.
to bring up the dog incident again?
She had potentially the biggest cat I've ever seen in my life there in the background. Kat, her dad, potentially training as a vet.
The Doberman?
It was a Doberman.
The Doberman.
It was a
Doberman, sometimes mistaken for a black cat.
I'm sure it's happened before. But Teo, for her as a player, that frustration with such a big milestone coming, and also watching some difficulties from afar for your club.
Yeah, and I wonder, Grace, is this even coachable? You know, Melbourne City is committed to a style of play. They've got the personnel in this team, but it's different to last year. We spoke about Tori Tumeth earlier. Winnie Heatley also left to go overseas. Stay with live play here because Courtney Vine is away through the right and is popping the ball across nearly to Princess Abini. Didn't want to dive out and lunge and goes and retrieves the ball instead. But Sydney's in the groove here. Hawkesby and Abini link up. Now Madison Haley. Do they have the finishing touch? Not enough power behind the shot. But Sydney FC, this is, I think, the tape of this game. All the other coaches, they may not have Sydney FC's players, but they're going to go and really want to study what Sydney FC are doing to this Melbourne City defence.
Well, Courtney Vine and Princess Abini must know I'm on the couch today and say, wait a minute, because that was a really lovely build-up play. That ball from Vine didn't just quite have the shape to pull back to Abini, but plays like that are just so hard to defend against.
Let's cross to Allianz Stadium now. Brianna Goodchild is there. We know she is the ultimate hype woman for the home side in stadiums around Australia. Brianna, you got some really special guests with you there today as well.
I do. So I'm here at Allianz Stadium, and yes, normally the home side wins when I'm around, but I found the City fan. Say hi! Yeah! And I'm here with Olivia. Now, Olivia, when did you travel up to Sydney? And who are you here supporting? We're here supporting the City girls and Daniela girls. And why Daniela? We're her family. Yes, that's right, including girls. Now, Mum, it's a bit of a tough one. We're 2 down. How is it watching your baby out there?
Yeah, it's pretty good, pretty exciting stuff, pretty proud of her. We're really happy, and hopefully the girls can get a couple of goals back and get something out of the game.
What do you reckon? Can they do it? Yeah, they can do it. And can I just get one more cheer for Daniela? Okay, well, are not giving up hope.
Brianna, thank you so much. She's found the Garlich family there who are pumped and hoping to see Daniela get some big minutes there today, Teo. And do you know what? Maybe they need a change.
Yeah, maybe they do. And look, I guess I actually don't mind. I did say I was Mr. Pump the Brakes on Garlich in the opening rounds of the season, but Grace, you've lived this. You were a talented young player who got called up to youth national teams. Tell us about the peaks and troughs. Australia's still not at full-time professionalism. Melbourne City is as close as you're going to get to living and breathing 24 hours a day as a full-time professional footballer. But we're not quite there yet. What sort of variations in performance does that exacerbate when you are also a young person who's still making your way in the game?
Yeah, it's a really big question. Look, I certainly don't consider myself in the realm of talent that Daniela Galic is.
You went to an under-20 Women's World Cup and so did she.
Okay, Teo, and you've got an amazing memory, so we won't split hairs here. But look, I'm really fond of Daniela Galic, and I think it's a thing. She's a really grounded kid. She's 16 years old, but she's got a very steady head on her shoulders, and I think that's the most important part of being a foundationally good footballer, is having a good head on your shoulders, and she certainly does that. Obviously, she's got the family support networks. We can see the numbers who are supporting and around her, and she will have peaks and troughs. She'll have coaches who prefer her over other players or prefer her to be an impact player off the bench, and I think this season we've seen Galic and what she can contribute when she does start. For whatever reason this afternoon, Dario's decided not to go with her, but look, I've got no doubt that when she does come on, she'll
big
make
test for Sally James here, coming off her line, and Princess Sabini is able to get it away. That pass, that giveaway of the ball there from Briley Henry. I wonder who they're subbing off. Yep, right on cue. Daniela Galic is going to be coming on, so the good luck charm strikes again.
It's the chair.
The power of the chair.
Get into existence.
I'm surprised they're taking off Letitia McKenna, though. I thought that was a very tired-looking touch there from Briley Henry to give up possession. But Melbourne City, there are other subs available to them. Caitlin Carriage, maybe that's the more appropriate sub. Darcy Malone, and also the young defender Isabella Ricardo. Sydney FC are yet to make a change, and why would you when they're playing the way that they are?
No, I'm sure at some point we will see changes purely just for load management, fresh legs to come on for Ante Juric's side, but at the moment they're looking pretty comfortable.
Let's have a look around the grounds then, shall we, as we approach the 60-minute mark there at Allianz Stadium. Sydney FC leading 2-0 over Melbourne City at the moment, and 2 goals, Teo, at every ground around the Dub Zone afternoon.
It has been, Nev, it's been a goal-filled Dub Zone this afternoon. Every team except Melbourne City has scored as well, which is great to see. If you're only just joining us, Melbourne Victory took the lead in just the 4th minute through Beattie Goad, but Sophie Harding's first goal for the Wanderers and third career has levelled that game up. You can see they've got a corner here at CV Smith in the wind, but that's a great catch from Casey Dumont to collect the ball. And then over in Ballarat, it was an early penalty, won and scored by Susan Fonts on cam in the 11th minute, cancelled out by Emma Robers in the 22nd minute, and thankfully everyone got up all right from that collision, which resulted in Robers scoring into an empty net. So no subs as yet in that game. And another assist for Danielle Steer as well, Grace, who is slowly but surely making the gradual impact, as we see that cross, just missing Hannah Wilkinson up in Sydney, but slowly but surely making the gradual impact that Mark Torcaso would have hoped for when he knew that Jess McDonald was leaving and he needed to replace her with a different import, but Australian passport holding forward.
Well, the question over Danielle Steer was always going to be what kind of quality player is she? She was a bit of an unknown entity coming into our competition, but she's steadily working her way into this side and getting assists and being involved in that kind of attacking play for her as an individual will obviously really be important to her confidence, but also to try and slot in and replace the likes of Jess McDonald. Look, I think Jess McDonald is an irreplaceable player, but in terms of an attacking outlet, Danielle Steer is starting to prove her worth.
See a yellow card here for breaking up play in the Perth midfield, so maybe no Ella Mastrantonio, but her spirit lives on in the form of that booking. And Western United now are going to try and go on the attack and turn this around before half-time, of course. They left it very late over at Macedonia Park in the west. And suggestion there that it's actually Angie Beard who's been booked. I don't think that's quite accurate. Maybe that's confirmation of an earlier yellow card in the game. Anyway, Western United in possession and Sydney Cummings hitting a long ball. One of the nominees for Player of the Month, Sydney Cummings, and as it falls at the edge of the area, this is where Robers could be dangerous again, and the ball is swept away. So this match, I'll give you some stats to mull over. Western United now up to 7 shots, 2 on target. Perth Glory, 3 shots, 2 on target. 50% possession both ways. And we know, Grace, that Western United, they're not the most comfortable team when they're the ball-dominant team, so they won't actually mind that it's 50-50 break-even at the moment.
No, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind sitting back as well and just allowing Perth to have a little bit more of the possession too. We know they are that kind of counter-attacking style of football team that really love to play on the counter and on those transition moments, but with the ball in possession, a little less sure of themselves.
So Angie Beard was booked earlier in the game, and that was Liz Anton we saw there getting the booking for Perth Glory.
We do want to hear from you wherever you're watching your football this afternoon. If you are at one of our 3 games that are currently underway in the Liberty A-League, use that hashtag Dubzone. Send in your pictures. Let us know how you're finding the football this afternoon. That's what we want, isn't it? To know, to see those pictures, to know where everyone is.
And speaking of socials, you'll be very happy with this, Teo. Liberty A-Leagues did post a poll to see who thought Kirsty Fenton should be involved with the Matildas. And there is a very strong 80% who have said yes. So either you are encouraging people to see her skill, or it's just something Teo needs to be the one picking the Matildas squad at this point.
Well, I think it's a credit to the 80%.
You're right.
And indeed to Kirsty Fenton herself, who's playing some really good football.
Absolutely. And there was a comment also from Joe Chama, who is always very active on socials, and we appreciate your comments every week on hashtag Dubzone, who once again brought up the topic of Casey Dumont, and we did not see her make the call up for this particular Matilda squad for the Cup of Nations tournament. But I think once again, a player very much worth talking about.
Isn't it telling, though, that like Claire Hunt's good form has really crescendoed? Western Sydney started winning games right at selection time. Casey Dumont missed a couple of games ill. And Casey Dumont was always making an outside run, but exacerbated by the fact that she missed a couple of games, and any chance for this show, other media that cover the competition, fans, just word of mouth to lobby for Casey Dumont, it expired so quickly because she just wasn't out there playing and putting up the amazing performances that we see every week.
And look, I think the reality of that conversation was that those 3 in contention for the Matildas, Lydia Williams, Tegan Micah and Mackenzie Arnold, their positions perhaps weren't ever truly threatened due to their training environments where they are playing in some of the best leagues in the world. If they're playing, starting, sitting the bench, they're still in the best training environments. And for a goalkeeper, getting that kind of repetition amongst good quality is what you need. So I can understand that side of the argument. But for Casey, it's really pleasing to see her back out there today. And look, I hope she can settle back in the form we saw from her in the opening part of the season.
And she is in fact leading that poll that we posted on Liberty A-League's Twitter to say, who did you want to see as part of this Matilda squad? So it's a real testament to how a lot of the viewers are seeing her contribution to the game as well.
Who is our number 1 keeper for the Cup of Nations, Grace? Or do you think they'll keep us guessing and rotate?
It's a really good question, because Lydia Williams in the last couple of weeks has moved from PSG in France to Brighton Hove and Albion in the WSL. So different move for Lydia, but hoping that she can get some match minutes in her legs.
I think it's a great signing for Brighton too, to be honest. Yeah,
look, it is. And for Lydia, when she went to PSG, we were intrigued as to her being the second goalkeeper behind Bohardi, and we thought, well, that's not really why you'd go over to a team like PSG. So I was unsurprised to see Lydia's move. And look, if she does start playing and getting more minutes, I'd say she will be our number 1, but Tegan Micah is always sort of knocking on that door as well.
I felt that pre that injury, she almost had it locked down. Lids. I thought over the course of the journey with TG, she had become the number 1 choice, and then obviously that injury throws the door back open. But were you starting to get that feeling, Teo, that...
Yeah, I think so. I think the Asian Cup was indicative as well of how their thinking was going as we got to the pointy end of that tournament after all 3 goalkeepers got 1 game during the group stage. But wasn't it interesting that when we had Melissa Barbie... Sorry to bring it up again, Kat. Wasn't it telling that when we had Melissa Barbieri on, that she was just like flat out, Tegan Micah is playing in the Champions League. Lydia Williams' team is in the Champions League. You pick the goalkeepers that are in Champions League football. So, I don't know, maybe we're underrating the value of just reputation here. Like I said last time, I don't think Rosengard had played at all well in the Champions League. And if you're a goalkeeper protecting a bad team, you get the chance to have a worldie to, be the last line of defence. And I honestly don't think Tegan Micah's goalkeeping for Rosengard was very good in the Champions League, and that's why Lids is my number 1.
Yeah, that's a fair shout as well. And when you think of the kind of players that our 3 Australian goalkeepers overseas are coming up against in terms of their shot stopping, the quality of those strikers, the best strikers in the world arguably play in England and in some of those leagues as well. So our Aussie goalkeepers are facing some of the best strikers in the world, which is important to remember.
And Mel Andreatta just said it to us moments ago that one of the key things they look at is game time, and how it obviously matters what league you're playing and where you are, but at the end of the day, you need to be out there on the pitch getting those minutes to to prove that you are worthy of that Matildas squad as well.
Just such a tough one for the players themselves. It would be front of mind for so many of them as they look at what that next move is, as Lids makes that move back to the UK, as Chloe Lagazzo contemplates what's to come. Those elements of what's within their control and what's already signed and a done deal would be playing on their minds, Gigi, in the lead up to the World Cup.
In a big way, and I think that's exactly why Lydia would have made that move. For Chloe Lagazzo, look, I'm genuinely concerned for her and her playing minutes over at Kansas City, because when she recovered from her ACL last year, she didn't play a minute in the NWSL, came back to Western United and has obviously done really well. But for her, I really, really hope that she can either get this injury under control or look to find some good minutes, and both preferably, so that she can see herself back in contention for the World Cup team.
Let's do a score check, Teo, with our 3 simultaneous games around the grounds, starting with the Allianz Stadium game, the one that is the most progressed. Sydney FC up against Melbourne City, our early kick-off this afternoon.
Yeah, 2/3 of the way through the match. Briley Henry has been subbed off for Caitlin Carriage, so I think we were on to that. We could see it coming. But 2-0, 13 shots to 5 on target to none. This is the lowest point of Melbourne City's season so far. They are being thoroughly outplayed by a fellow contender. Where we see Serena Bolden about to jump the fence over at, it's known as Siebes, CB Smith Reserve in Melbourne, because often you Siebes be going there. But the game itself is a 1-1 draw at present. Melbourne with 9 shots to 2, 3 shots on target to 1. And before anyone from Moreland Council complains, they built a pole in front of the grandstand. The reason they filmed towards the grandstand, see the pole on the halfway line? That's in front of the grandstand. Yeah, you've all got shocked looks on your faces, like you're not familiar with the ways of NPL Victoria. Anyway, let's go to Western United versus Perth Glory, where the score is also 1-1. 7 shots to 4, 2 on target apiece. That game ticking down to halftime. But you see there, Hilary Beale tipping that shot over the bar. Perth are asking plenty of questions of the top team on the table. And hey, maybe 3 weeks off was a blessing in disguise for the Glory.
But as we take a deep dive into one of these 3 games, I mean, we've got to head back to Siebes, don't we? Ultimately, where else could we go at this moment in Dub Zone?
All right, so we've got stoppage time here. Beattie Goad's opener, Sophie Harding scoring the equaliser, and the assist, unassisted that goal, whereas Alex Chidiac played through Goad for the opener. 4 minutes of additional time. Alexia Apostolakis had to go off injured after half an hour, and she has been replaced by Angelique Christodoulou, who has since been booked, Grace. So like for like in terms of the defensive switch, but we speak a lot about match minutes and loading the young players. Alexia Apostolakis didn't start the season, came in, became a very important member of this first 11, but sadly has suffered an injury today.
Yeah, that's really concerning for Apostolakis, because she has been really solid for Western Sydney. And I remember at the start of the season when she wasn't getting many match minutes, I thought, well, this is not going to go well for a young player who had established herself there last year at the Wanderers. But to see her back in, we'll have to get an update on sort of what has happened with that injury. But look, I hope it's nothing too severe.
Simo on Twitter there, sorry Teo, asking Gigi whether we think Jada Wyman is a chance of making the Matildas squad. Teo was mentioning the importance of those match minutes and how very quickly when you're injured you can drop out of the discussion. Where's Jada Wyman at?
Yeah, look, it's a very good question. The first part of it is at the moment she's carrying an injury, so pretty quickly that sort of puts that on ice for the time being. But then also in that sort of ranking conversation of goalkeepers, Casey Dumont, Jada Wyman, and who would be the next cab off the rank, we have seen Jada Wyman in Matilda's squads in recent years, and whether that's as the third or the backup, look, I think she's very much still in the frame, in the window, and I'm sure the national team setup is keeping a close eye on her and her recovery. But until she is fit and playing again, to Mel Andreatta's point, look, there's not too much they can assess her on at the moment.
I'm going to slightly be devil's advocate because I'm not sure I totally believe this, but for all the pressure that gets put on players to go overseas, other players seem to have immunity and just get called up to the national team, even if it's out of the NPL, as we saw with Princess Abini, Taylor Ray, and other players for the Portugal and Spain tour. But Jada Wyman is someone around which no overseas chat seems to happen. She has an agent. Agents field plenty of questions from plenty of teams. Jada's had the opportunity to move overseas, I'm sure. But why isn't Sydney FC want to keep hold of her, and the A-League is getting longer and longer to accommodate that? But is it as simple as Mackenzie Arnold is training in that WSL environment, Jada Wyman's at Sydney FC, and that's the decision that's been made, even though Jada is the outstanding keeper, along with Casey Dumont of the A-League?
Yeah, look, I think it could come down to that environment, the question of what environment are you playing, training in? Who are you facing shots from week in, week out? And is it NPL New South Wales or is it the WSL in the UK? And if it's a WSL in the UK, then you're facing the likes of our very own Sam Kerr and
well,
Sarah
it's worth mentioning
Baxtenius.
Jada spent the winter at Sydney Olympic as well. She played NPL.
Exactly. So you're facing NPL players, and that's to no slight on those players because they're quality in their own right, but they're never going to be the world class that we see in some of the best leagues in the world, which is arguably over in Europe.
And also, you would just live in fear of sliding the NPL in any way with Teo Paliseri on the couch.
You would. I wouldn't dare.
No.
So stoppage time has nearly expired here, and Western Sydney Wanderers, I think they'll be pretty happy to have got a foothold in this game, and they will back themselves perhaps to overrun the Melbourne Victory here. And they think back to how they played in that very entertaining 0-0 draw between the two teams at Wanderers Football Park. It was a much warmer day, and Western Sydney Wanderers perhaps weren't daring enough to take on that game and really go for it to get the win, and they ended up having to settle for a draw. But Neve, Melbourne City, are they in the horrors again? Mackenzie Hawkesby has 1 assist already. Courtney Vine already has a goal. What are they cooking here, Sydney FC? Courtney Vine burns away from Julia Grosso. It's a tap-in for Madison Haley. And it's 3-0 for Sydney FC. Courtney Vine has come out, and I tell you what, checks in the mail for Catherine Cannuli, because ever since you and Knowles named that combined team, Grayscale, you have lit a fire under Courtney Vine. A great assist. And Melbourne City, they are being shredded. It's 3-0.
Happy to be of service. And I'm really, really pleased to see Courtney Vine playing the level of what I think she should be playing in this league.
Every week.
Week in, week out. So consistently now for the last couple, this is what we're seeing from Courtney Vine. It's a really lovely late run into the box from Madison Haley and hasn't been defended well by Melbourne City. But for Sydney FC to be going in at 3-0 at the break is strong. It's really good.
Melbourne City's record defeat, I believe, is 4-0 to the Perth Glory. So I'm going to have to jump into the record books here because I think we're starting to enter record territory if Sydney score one more.
We can have a chat with the Adelaide United coach, Adrian Stenta, now ahead of Adelaide's clash with Brisbane tomorrow. A really big one in the Liberty A-League and a big one when you look at this ladder. Step us back through it quickly, Teo, before we have a chat with Adrian, because ladder-wise and in terms of staying in touch with the top 4, points this weekend really crucial for Adelaide.
Well, everyone in Adelaide is going hard for Western Sydney today because Melbourne Victory's on 19 points now with their drawing. Adelaide are 13. That was the situation at kickoff today. Western Sydney Wanderers are 12 with the advantage of a draw. Even if Wanderers win and leapfrog Adelaide, it just keeps Melbourne Victory within reach on 19 points. Sydney FC is up to 24 now. Melbourne City's on 25. Western United's on 28. They are starting to get out of reach for the chasing pack. So, you know, Melbourne Victory might say, what's new? Everyone's against Victory. But quite literally, you look at the table, everyone's against Victory here. If Brisbane, Adelaide, Wanderers, any of them are going to actually catch them for 4th spot.
From a competition perspective for the neutral, Victory dropping points this weekend really keeps that top 4 race hot in the coming weeks.
It does. And when there starts to be that separation in the ladder and you realise that mathematically teams can't make the top 4, it sort of takes off the fire a little bit about some of those games. So I'd love to see it sort of stay really hotly contested for at least a few more weeks, but because for the neutral, that's a fantastic position for our competition to be in.
Victory with a point out of their clash with the Western Sydney Wanderers at the moment, Teo. Still plenty of time left at Seabs for this one to play out in whatever way it should. So, but ultimately, points big for Victory against the Wanderers, who are further down the table but going on a good run.
They are on a good run, and Kat Smith rightfully nominated for Coach of the Month as well. But I also think that Melbourne Victory have found a way, and, you know, Adelaide was a classic example of that on the back of Alex Chidiac on a day where otherwise I suspect they may have been beaten. If not for her, she actually willed them to 3 incredibly valuable points.
Let's head to Adelaide now, where Adrian Stenta, the coach of Adelaide United, has been good enough to join us. Thank you so much for joining us ahead of your clash with Brisbane tomorrow. Can I ask you to begin with about that ladder that we've just been talking about here on Dub Zone and the importance of 3 points as this race for the top 4 really does hot up?
Yeah, the 3 points is obviously going to be really important. There's, you know, we're in the back half of the season now and sort of running out of opportunities to collect points to close the gap between us and the teams that are ahead of us. So very important game tomorrow.
Adrian, one of the things we've been chatting about on Dubzone in recent weeks is that search for goals from open play for your side. I know you've tried a number of different combinations up front this season. Can you take us into your discussions as a team, with your squad, with your coaching staff, as you look at those options to find the trigger that'll work?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one because we feel like at times we've been playing some good football and still getting into some dangerous positions, but haven't really been able to create those really big chances consistently through matches, and especially in the second half of games as well. So, look, we're working really hard. The playing group's working really hard. The coaching staff are working really hard to try and turn that around. But it seems like all the goals that we scored last year haven't been able to be replicated in this season.
Well, speaking of goals you scored last year, Adrian, Fiona Wirtz, we know the class, the quality of the player that she is. This year, obviously not having quite the success that she would have hoped, and we saw a bit of frustration come from her when she was subbed off last week. Can you share with us a little bit about the conversations, how she's travelling, and look how you're managing to get the best out of Fiona for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I didn't actually notice what had happened last week until after the game because I was focusing on the game that was going on in front of me. But I've had some good conversations with Fiona since, and she's just frustrated that she's not able to do more at the moment to help the team. And she's not the only one in the team that's feeling like that as well. There's a lot of players that are frustrated, probably mostly by the inconsistency of form, both of individuals but also as a team collectively, and that's what's been costing us so far this year.
Adrian, I've got a bit of a bigger picture question about Adelaide, because you're the only team in town, and you have been the only team in town since the inception of both men's and women's A-League. But we've seen the effect that Melbourne City coming in had on Melbourne Victory, dragging their standards up. They went from a wooden spoon team to a title contender, chasing Melbourne City. Now we've seen Western United come into that Victorian market, pick almost entirely homegrown players, and set a new benchmark again in this league. Does Adelaide actually benefit from being a one-team town, or could you use the spur of a rival and an opponent in your city?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and my honest answer to that is I'm not sure. But I like the fact that we're a one-team town at the moment. It enables the whole state to get behind the club, both the men's and women's team, and it allows us to really, represent not only our club but our state and our city with pride.
Another question I had is about players that have been fringe Matildas, maybe they aren't. We saw Chelsea Dorber called up to the National Under-23 team. We saw Dylan Holmes get one cap. Where are those players at? Where are they at as far as ambitions to push on to that next level? Is Chelsea going back to the NWSL to finish her contract at Chicago? And what's next for Dylan?
Well, I haven't really spoken too much to those individual players about what their next steps are. And to be honest, they've been really professional, and they're fantastic with their work ethic and their commitment to Adelaide, the club that they're currently at. And so I think if you were to speak to those two players, they would really focus on, just trying to finish off the season as well as they possibly can with Adelaide, and then, reassess what their next moves are from there. But you're right, Chelsea is contracted to Chicago for another season. It's perhaps a question for her to ask, whether that's where she's going to be or not.
Adrian, talk us through what it's like managing the expectations of both your fans and the players off the back of a fantastic season that you had last season, and then dealing with the challenges of this season. What's that talk like that you have with the girls? What's the general approach that you're taking with this season?
Well, our general approach the whole way along is really to embrace those expectations. I mean, that's where we want to be. We don't want to be talked about as a team that's at the bottom of the ladder or out of finals or struggling. So we've really tried to those expectations, and most of the talk has been about confidence and belief, because I certainly have a lot of confidence and belief in my group, and at times it's been tested this year, but it's unwavering for me, and that's what I speak to my players about.
This question, I promise, far more straightforward. Ella Tonkin, when's she back from her injury? Because she had a great start to the season, and I really think you miss her.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think she's a fantastic young player, has really gone to another level and was playing well for us at the start of the year. And it's just unfortunate that she, sustained a stress fracture in her foot. We're hopeful that she will come back before the end of the season and be able to play some games. She's out of the moon boot and she's doing a lot more sort of off the field. And so we're hopeful that you'll see her again before the end of this season.
Adrian, thank you so much for having us chat with us on Dub Zone this afternoon, and good luck against Brisbane tomorrow afternoon.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Adelaide United taking on Brisbane Roar at Service FM Stadium. It's tomorrow, a 4 p.m. kickoff local time. We've got to remember, I loved your question, Kat, about the expectations around Adelaide for this season, because we're having this discussion with Adrian there about where the goals come from and how they continue to push for the top four. They're sitting 5th on the table, Teo, and it's a team that played finals football for the first time last year.
And this time next year, they might be playing finals because we might have 12 teams in a top 6. But I think through the lens of relative expectations, I picked them to win the league this year. I thought their midfield was going to carry them and had the depth to do it, Grace. But to be honest, I also thought that Dorber and Wirtz in an 18-game season were sure things to score double figures, and neither of them are firing.
No, they're not. And that's a really difficult position to be in as a player when you are scoring well, putting goals away, to come back and do it again, to rinse and repeat. And for someone like Fiona Wirtz, I mentioned to Adrian there, and I appreciate his honesty, that he didn't see that frustration straight away, but then has gone back and had a couple of conversations about how to manage that. And understandably, Fiona would be frustrated with herself more than anything. She would be her harshest critic in this moment, that she knows she's not performing or not contributing to the team in the way that she did last year.
I have a question just to follow up. Look, I know we could go down this rabbit hole for hours, but am I onto something that being a one-team town is actually counterproductive to Adelaide and to Brisbane, and that cities of that size could actually benefit from having a rival in town? The effect that Melbourne City had on Victory, the effect that Western United is going to have on both of them, shaking it up. You know, you don't own the monopoly on your homegrown players. When you go to the negotiating table, you can't leverage the fact you're the only team in that state for players that might want to live at home or might want to be closer to family and friends.
Well, it can work both for and against you, because the fans are your best friends when you're doing well, but can quickly turn against you when you're not getting the results. And, you know, Canberra United isn't the exact kind of example as well of my
Two teams in
experience
Canberra,
there.
Grace.
But too small a city, perhaps, you'd argue, for Canberra. But for someone like City, they do have the existing rivalries in NPL with Adelaide City there as well. So I can understand how introducing another team into the state would encourage a little bit of youth development through the state as well, but also see that competition with an Adelaide United team perhaps into the future.
Now, we did mention 3-0 in this game and still the score. Melbourne City's record defeat was 6-0 to Melbourne Victory in January 2021. That was where they played back-to-back derbies. COVID had closed a lot of borders. They lost 6-0 to Melbourne Victory one week. They turned around and beat Melbourne Victory 3-2 the next. The only other time they've lost by this sort of a scoreline, they lost 4-0 to Western Sydney Wanderers in March 2021. And Briley Henry, who now plays for Melbourne City, scored 2 of the goals that day. Rosie Galea scored the other 2. So those are the 2 heaviest defeats in Melbourne City's history. And if Sydney FC score 1 more, they'll be on the podium with the equal second biggest defeat they've ever suffered.
Well, for Ante Juric's side now as well, just managing the tail end of this game to keep a clean sheet, that will be the most important thing. For Melbourne City, looking what they can do in terms of a response in this last 7 or so minutes of regulation time. But that's a really, really tough one for City to come into this game. Again, can't take anything away from the quality that we've seen from Sydney today, because they've been firing and we've seen some really good build-up play. They haven't been lucky scrammy goals. They've been some really quality finishes from Sydney.
And that's ultimately 9 goals in 2 games. Are we seeing the launch of Ante Juric's Sky Blues from now through to finals?
Yeah, look, maybe we are. And I think sometimes with the team, you don't want to peak too early. And there was a couple of testy patches for Ante Juric, perhaps the individuals in his team. And maybe now the trajectory is onwards and upwards. To score 9 in the last 2 games, which is as many goals as they've conceded across the course of the season so far. Look, it's a pretty impressive output.
And from a Matildas perspective, to see Courtney Vine absolutely fanging it down that right wing and centering the ball really beautifully into the box, which is an area that at times we've struggled from an Australian perspective to really make sure that Sam Kerr, for example, is getting the service that we see her get at club level. Are these kind of performances really upping her stocks heading into the...
They are, and we just spoke about the weight of expectation around a team like Adelaide, but the weight of expectation around a player like Courtney Vine, as I just said to Teo a couple of moments ago, these are the kind of performances that in the Liberty A-League, Courtney Vine has to be, in my mind, producing week in, week out. So I'm really, really pleased to see her stepping up to this standard in the last couple of games.
One question, and we appreciate Mel Andreatta coming up, giving us the time, but I forgot to ask about Holly McNamara. And it's interesting that Tony Gustafsson See, and that's probably the reason I asked the questions about who's on contract versus who's not, because Gustafsson mentioned the current injured players, Lagazzo, also... I've had a blank
Ellie
here.
Carpenter, Kaya Simon,
of course, and Carpenter, but didn't mention Holly McNamara. And again, we spoke about it on this couch last week. She's got the short runway, but no shorter than what she did to play her way into the Asian Cup last year. Dario Vidičić spoke about her starting to increase the training load. Melbourne City's social media has really been, tracking her return to play. So it's not like they're trying to keep her secret. It's not like they're trying to shy away or give her a soft landing. And I mean, a result like today is probably highlighting the need for the dynamism of a Holly McNamara. And she is also the player that unlocks Hannah Wilkinson and turns her into a league-leading striker as well. But do you think she's off the radar altogether, or does she need to win her way back in?
I wouldn't say she's off the radar altogether, but I think your point is a really pertinent one around those three players in Ellie Carpenter, Kaya Simon, Chloe Lagazzo being contracted Matildas. And Holly McNamara, to my understanding, is not a contracted Matilda. Doesn't mean she's out of the frame by any means, and I'm sure as these months progress, we see the recovery of players like Kaya Simon. Will she be fit? Will she be ready? Will she be available? If the answer to that is no, then of course there is that extended list of players that come into contention, and I've got no doubt Holly McNamara would be one of those.
Lay it out for us, Teo, for those of us who aren't across the contract situation, and the question that you asked Mel in the interview before about how important those contracts are for keeping players in the lineup. It's a thing that the Matildas fought for through the last CBA. Talk us through what it means, where we're at.
No, I think you've actually summed it up pretty well. So it's the reason that we asked Kate Gill last week, when's the next one being negotiated? And she mentioned that, talks have started. But
and worryingly will continue through the World Cup. I don't love that timing.
Imagine if they went on strike during the World Cup. Let's not talk that into existence.
But,
you've got to be so careful what we say on this show.
Yeah, I'm not sitting in that chair, so I'm okay. But it's kind of like, think about what the cricketers did for years and years. And when it comes to sort of players' unions and football associations, football was the groundbreaker. Kibon Taliadoros, the original PFA, and then second Steve Waugh reference of the show. Steve Waugh and the cricketers actually looked at what the PFA had done in football and formed their incredibly powerful cricketers union. And what they would do is they would negotiate for a central contract, and what it means is that you are paid and you're employed by Cricket Australia all year round, and you can go and play for your Sheffield Shield State League teams. And then the invention of T20 cricket certainly mixed all of that up, and they kind of drifted away from it. But it's a way of keeping your players employed, and on the books. But does it also create a stratified system? Does it create an unofficial hierarchy? And these are the chats we don't have, because I think a lot of people just want to cheer for the Matildas, And a show like this is asking about who wears the shirt, but also how they come to wear the shirt. And I think that puts a greater value on wearing that shirt to ask that question.
And it's such an interesting and nuanced discussion in itself, isn't it? Because that kind of certainty for a player, especially in a competition, GG, that hasn't been well funded throughout its history. So that kind of certainty for a player that they know they've got this amount of money over a 2-year period because they've been signed to the national side has a huge import for them as an individual.
Of course it does. And like any workplace, the difference of being contracted permanently or for a period of time, or a casual employee, your security in that job landscape. So especially for those players knowing, okay, well, I've got 2 years here on my contract, I can work hard, but even if I have a little fall in form, that I may still be called up into camps because I've got this contract. But, to the point of your question, Teo, Mel Andreatta said, that's not the case. And she said when looking at the squad list, it's based on form. And, I'm sure there's opinions around how right or wrong, we can sit there and agree or disagree on form of the list of the current Matildas, but arguably a lot of those players are and would be on contracts.
I mean, I guess, they're employed to do that job, and we have to respect the fact that they pick the team. But I do feel as though a lot of the media are just kind of fans with keyboards that just want to cheer for the team, and they don't want to ask too many hard questions about, especially in the margins as well, whether it's young players that have been put in. You look at the Portugal and Spain series with a lot of fringe players that were, thrown in the deep end for that, but also younger players that have been selected on a more regular basis that, you don't want to go too hard because ultimately, you don't know what sort of effect that could have. But I think that increased level of scrutiny is necessary. And not to bring it back to the Socceroos again, but FA has just doubled down on the Graham Arnold approach, and Graham Arnold kept everyone guessing. And I say every week, who's the Adam Taggart? Who's the Tom Rogic? Who's the Mitch Langerak? Who is the unexpected player we're leaving out?
But who's the Trent Sainsbury who goes anyway to the World Cup, even though he didn't get the call up?
As a fan, yeah.
As a fan.
But I guess, when we talk about holding, the teams to the same standard and we talk about equality, what's wrong with applying the Socceroos lens to the Matildas? I don't think it's that big a leap.
Yeah, look, I want to cheer for the Matildas too, don't get me wrong. I want to be a fan as much as I am a pundit and provide analysis. And I think it's a really mature, important part of the game that we do look at the players and say, even the pub test, who's performing, who's not, who isn't in their best form. And that's not a criticism of them as a person or as a footballer. It's just putting a really honest lens on football, on these players that we know are going to represent the Matildas. And look, that's a fantastic conversation that we're having that.
And we're not saying it's either or. Are we? Ultimately, we're not saying that we don't want the contract situation to exist, but it's about the game being funded well enough, Teo, that there's still the potential for players outside that contract, outside of the already contracted allocation, to still get the call up. We've got the funding to back them in.
Let's not forget, there's a very high likelihood the Matildas will win 3 from 3 at the Cup of Nations and be on a 7-game winning streak. And I suspect when you can throw a number around like that, RBA, results-based analysis, means that no one's going to be listening to the nuances in the fine margins. They are going to point to, give me the executive summary, the Matildas have won 7 in a row. And I suspect, we might hear a bit of that if they do that at the Cup of Nations.
And we'll be excited by that as well.
Teo, with the youth teams as well, so if a player has represented the Matildas at any youth level, is there also likely that there is a preference in those girls transitioning into the Matildas?
I can't answer that. I cannot answer that. Plenty of players play for the young Matildas or the junior Matildas, and by the time they're 20 or 21, aren't even playing NPL anymore. I do think that if you went through the youth national teams want to not just identify players that they can keep in the system, but identify players that will go on to play for the senior national team. To their credit, I don't think they pick the fastest, biggest, strongest teams that can go and bully youth national tournaments and try to win them for the sake of winning them. I do think they pick the players they think will play for the Matildas in the future. And you ask the coaches that, they'll say the same thing. Not that I think it's, again, an either-or choice.
It's a great question, though, Kat, because what we do see and what we have seen a lot of over the years is that players either play the junior Matildas, young Matildas, and we do see those ones then step up into the senior Matildas team, but we also see a massive drop-off of players either into NPL or out of football entirely. That's where the Promising Matildas program, Young Matildas program, is so important, to having that continuity of high-level football to make sure that we don't lose these really good players who may not yet have peaked, or who may need a little bit more time in a high training environment to then make that step up to the Matildas, because it is really sad when you do see these players in their early 20s, too old for the young Matildas, not good enough for the Matildas, who just drop off the radar.
Yeah, you have to wonder, in that element of not being good enough, what is actually being done to develop those players, because if they showed signs of that potential early on, why isn't that opportunity being fostered?
But I think that's also why we're champions of this league. We're champions of the Liberty A-League. We're champions of it growing from 12 games to 22 games in the space of 2 seasons. We're champions of it growing by 2 teams and creating 22 extra starting 11 spots every weekend in the space of 2 seasons.
And also wanting to see Liberty A-League players make that Matildas call up, like Claire Hunt, like Courtney Vine. And when you see Courtney Vine playing today, and it's all over socials too, if you check out #DubZone, there's a lot of commentary around Courtney Vine's performance. People are very invested in Courtney Vine because of her Matildas representation, but because she is a face of the Liberty A-Leagues, and when she plays well, that touch, that assist to Madison Haley was very Sam Kerr-esque, in the sense of, I've seen Courtney Vine do many of those on the Matildas level, but it's good to see that happening, and we need more consistency. And I think...
Well, her and Mackenzie Hawkesby there, just high five, job well done. And this is, Grace, are we going to make Sydney FC title favourites after today, especially if Western United drop points to Perth?
Well, that's an early call.
Do we save that? Do we save that for stoppage time?
Let's hold that.
Hold it. Remember the power of the chair, Teo.
While we are holding that thought and really recognising the power of the chair, Catherine Cannuli sat in that chair last week, and we spoke about whether or not we would see a change in leadership, a change of coach in the Liberty A-League this season. Well, we did this week, and it's happened at the Newcastle Jets. The Jets and Ash Wilson have parted ways. Gary Van Egmond will coach the Jets for the rest of the season, and Catherine Cannuli, former head coach of the Western Sydney Wanderers, now commentator and pundit, has been good enough to join us today. Nools, we've spoken about the power of the chair. Well, in this case, we saw it play out this week. Let's talk about the human side of things to begin with, because it is a tough old gig coaching. Can you tell us if you know how Ash Wilson is after the fallout with the Jets this week, and indeed how that played out in Newcastle?
Yeah, guys, I've spoken to Ash and she's doing as best as can be. You know, it's never easy to step away from the game and pull yourself away from a team that, you know, has she's invested so much in. She's been part of the Newcastle Jets for many, many years, and it's always tough. She knows she's got the full support of myself. Um, Especially being part of the Football Coaches Australia group as well, and all of our committee, and she has our full support.
Nulls, when we talk about the Newcastle Jets and their performance this season, they've been leaking goals at almost 3 a game through 10 games, and we haven't seen that change, that improvement that Jets fans in particular would have been looking for from their club. Was this a case, do you think, of something had to change as they look for answers?
Yes, of course. You know, as football fans and football clubs, we all want success, but that is at what cost? You know, we don't know what type of support that Ash Wilson was getting from the club, and that's something that obviously I can't comment on. But we've spoken about it time and time again. We want professionalism from coaches in the Liberty A League, but we are asking so much of coaches also because they are working multiple jobs. You know, Ash Wilson is a head teacher of a school, which is a demanding job, and then being a head coach as well is also a demanding job. So offering part-time wages to coaches in the Liberty A League, maybe that is a question now that we need to ask. You know, are we moving in the way of a future of starting to make this professional for coaches and allowing for full-time opportunities in employment throughout our Liberty A League clubs?
Catherine, you raise a great point because Gary Van Egmond, we just saw the news article there, is stepping in as the interim coach to the end of the season, but he's a full-time employee of the Newcastle Jets, and what we're hearing there is Ash Wilson is not. So have we quite literally replaced apples with oranges here in terms of the fairness of the employment agreement as well? Because are we not at a stage where perhaps a standard contract across the league means that your A-League women's coach has to be a 12-month of the year employee of the club? Because we know that Jeff Hopkins, for example, is a 12-month of the year employee of Melbourne Victory, but it's not the case at every club, is it?
It's not, Teo, and it's something that we really need to work on. And as everybody knows, I've obviously stepped away from the head coaching role at this point in time, and I'm working really hard with Football Coaches Australia, and it's something that's really close to my heart to really want to change this. I've seen it as a player, you know, go from semi-professional to now professional contracts and seen what we've been able to do as players. And I really, truly believe to take the next step in football in this country, we really need to look at coaches, whether that's male or female, working in the women's game, that it needs to be a professional employment for people. It is becoming too hard to be able to juggle 2 full-time jobs to be able to make a living.
Knowles, outside of just having more coaches and more opportunities available, one thing that's really key here too is the development of coaches and female coaches in particular, because even in the Liberty A Leagues, we still don't see that female representation across the board. We have Ash Wilson, Kat Smith, yourself in the past as well. What can you tell us about the development of female coaches on this side of the game?
It's a hard one at the moment. It's very difficult to obviously keep females in the game. It's hard enough to get females in the game in the first place, and to try and keep them in is even harder. There's been recent scholarships that have been pushed out via FIFA. I've been lucky enough to get on one of those in the last few months, which has been fantastic for me. We are working super hard, you know, with Football Coaches Australia and the APL to look at a pathway for female coaches in our game, but it's something that's going to take a little while to get there. But I can assure you, myself and all our team is going to work super hard to try and change the narrative for especially female coaches in the game, if not any coach that wants to be part of the coaching staff in the women's game.
Knowles, you are doing that already and through discussions like this one today. Thank you so much for joining us on Dub Zone.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Catherine Cannuli joining us on Dub Zone this afternoon with some really strong points there, Teo, about those changes that we need to see in terms of the professionalism of coaches and rewarding that with full-time contracts. Can I ask you about Newcastle Jets and their approach to their NPL side in particular? Because we know that ultimately the club doesn't have money to buy up big in the transfer market to bring big marquee players to the league. So do they do a similar thing with their NPL side to what we've seen so successfully with Western this season?
Yeah, it's such a curiosity because the emerging Jets have existed in the New South Wales NPL for a number of years, but they only won one game last season. I think they finished bottom of the league. And they played a number of players that just aren't appearing in their senior team. It's a youth team. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that reflected in who's been brought through this particular season. Chloe Wallando, I think, has played one game. Lara Gooch, Josie Morley. But these are players right on the fringes. I just wonder, Grace, does the Western model, showing the benefits of having a 12-month of the year environment, regardless of the badge on the shirt, it's essentially the same stream of club. Have the Jets missed a trick here and kind of misused the Emerging Jets program? Should that actually be their senior team 12 months of the year as best they can maintain it?
Look, I think looking at the Calder model, it's worked for Western United. As for the Jets, I can't speak specifically to what they do in their model, but what I can sort of from the outside look in at is the retention of players at that level. Because what we have seen from the Newcastle Jets is some really good young quality players who play a season in the A-League or the former W-League and then look to move on to another club. And you can look at players in the likes of a Courtney Vine, a Claire Wheeler, who are now in the Matildas, who, correct me if I'm wrong, but spent time at Newcastle Jets. So what the club actually does in terms of player retention, keeping those good young products there and building a team around that.
And just a little nugget on the Jets. I know we talk about Kirsty Fenton leaving to go to Sydney FC. They also released another defender at the end of last season who no other club picked up. And if anyone needs an injury replacement for a defender, Tiana Javer is out there doing pre-season with Bankstown City Lions. And look at the state of the Newcastle defence since those two left. I think it speaks for itself. So Tiana Javer, stocks up. Just, flip this if it ever comes to fruition as an injury replacement in the back half of the season.
Let's have a look around the grounds now and wrap up the scores. We've seen Sydney FC defeat Melbourne City 3-0 at Allianz Stadium this afternoon. It remains 1-1 between Melbourne Victory and the Western Sydney Wanderers, and also 1-1 between Western United and Perth Glory. So let's head to Allianz Stadium now, where our opening game on Dubzone the Savo has wrapped up. Courtney Vine with a goal and some storming runs down the right edge has been good enough to join us. Courtney, good to see you. Can I ask you how you're feeling about your football right now? Because it was brilliant to see that pace, that precision down the edge today.
Oh, thank you. Obviously we're stoked to get the 3 points against a quality team like City. It's a crucial time to start winning games and continue winning games. My performance, I think I'm starting to hit a good stride with my season. I started off a bit slow, and I think I'm starting to get my confidence back, which is nice, and I'm really starting to enjoy my games. And I think it shows on the field.
Courtney, I'm so sorry for leaving you out of the Big Blue 11. So I hope we can move on from that. But your performance, obviously, in the last couple of games has been excellent. So really, really well done there. In terms of looking back at last week, obviously you girls did get the result, but also leaked a couple. What was the conversation throughout the week about being defensively tight as you were today?
Yeah, I think the goals last week, I think that was a bit of a learning experience for our young goalkeeper. That was her debut, and I think with experience comes those decision-making errors, I think. And our backline is still superb. I think they are the best backline in the league, and they get no credit at all. They need to be spoken about way more, and that shows today again. And clean sheet, but Talia, I think, has stood up this week and learnt from her mistakes, and you can see that as well.
Courtney, from a tactical point of view, Melbourne City played the way they want to play. They had more possession, but they didn't create today. How much work goes into preparing for Melbourne City as opposed to a different opponent? Or is it we focused on us sort of week for Sydney FC?
Yeah, we've versed City a few times. I think we've also learnt from our mistakes against them in the last few years. They play a 3-5-2, and that is a hard formation to play against. But we did a lot of work on it, and I think for us, we decided to press those back three, and they didn't get enough space and time to make decisions today. But we also just played the way we usually play with little tactical changes.
Courtney, I'll have you know there were some comments about the defence line today, some even saying that it's like the players speak telepathically, which I think is a sign to how well your defensive line is. But a question for you. Tell us how you found out you were part of the Matilda squad. Is it a phone call? Is it an email? How do you find out? I want to know.
It's an email. I get an email. They send out a extended squad first. I think that's just letting a lot of girls know they're on the radar. And then, they send out the final squad. When was that? Like maybe a few days ago. How you find out, which is always exciting to get the news. And I'm really excited. I can't wait.
Courtney, are you the favourites now to win the Premier's Plate from here?
I don't know, are we? Are we in your eyes? I don't know.
I want to hear it from you. You're our guest.
Yeah, I think we're always premiers in our eyes. And I think we want that double this year. We haven't got it the last 2 years, and that's all that's on our mind at the moment.
It's good to see you playing such good football and so happy as a team and a unit as well. Courtney Vine, thank you so much for joining us on Dub Zone and congrats on the win today.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Courtney Vine with some awesome insights there, including the way during the week they look at and learn from past clashes with Melbourne City while also keeping the focus on those things that they can control.
And that's really important. I think it's really important to reflect on those moments, look at the past and see how we can get better from them, but also then as a team focusing on themselves. And when they've got the quality that they do have, it showed today, and keeping a clean sheet, not just for the team, but for the young goalkeeper in Talia Franco, especially important.
And it feels like, Teo, as we look ahead to the Premier's Plate, and you asked to hear it from Courtney there, it does feel like in the last couple of weeks we're starting to see Sydney FC hit their stride and make sure they're front and centre when that conversation happens.
It's funny because they've won 4 of their last 5 against Melbourne City now. The balance has completely swung in this head-to-head. Melbourne City still historically had a good record against Sydney FC, but Sydney FC have well and truly taken over now. In the more recent times. 4 wins for Sydney FC, 1 draw, 9 losses. Melbourne City still has the balance historically, but in more recent times, it's interesting that Vine is going back maybe to that 1 defeat, or maybe the fact they were just 2-0 down in the semi-final and had to dig themselves out of it as a lesson learnt from that game.
There's a comment here from Ben Smith saying Western United are really struggling to play out from the back. Their midfield has been unable to control the game as a result. Sakalis and on Songkam, I'm so sorry, that is a hard name for me to pronounce, asking some questions out wide too. What are your thoughts on that?
I think Ben Smith is from Western Australia and he's loving that Perth Glory through 66 minutes have put up a great fight. So great to see they're watching Dub Zone. I think it's an AM start with the time difference over in Western Australia too. So top of the morning to you, Ben. But the scoreline of 1-1, let's go into some of the numbers, Grace, and see where this game has developed into the second half. Because Hilary Beale has still been getting a bit of work. You might have seen when we've had the 3 boxes up or the game in the corner. Beale has still been making saves. Western United, 10 shots on goal, 5 on target. Perth Glory, 10 shots on goal, 4 shots on target. And the XG in the game, Perth Glory 1.1. Western United 0.5, big penalty shout here. Alana Cern with a crunching challenge, and she's unhappy because it's a corner, but at least it's not a penalty.
No, that's right. A good challenge nonetheless. So Alana Cern, how many times has she had to come up with those big moments for this Western United team this year? And once again, she's stood up for her side. She's been so impressive.
Western definitely have a height advantage here defending the set pieces, so maybe it's not a surprise that Hannah Lowry has just got company over there in the corner to try and cook something up over this dead ball. Let's wait and see if it's a more conventional delivery. Look at that, 8 corners for the Perth Glory in the game. It's hung high and it's allowed to bounce in the penalty area. Tash Rigby unable to get up to the ball, so they deal with defending the corner.
Joey Lynch, always across what is happening in Australian football, and a couple of really interesting tweets from him there, Kat, in terms of Sydney FC and the way that they've been playing in those last couple of games.
He said that over the last 180 minutes, Ante Juric's side has scored 2 more goals than Adelaide has this entire season, which I think is a real insight into how well they're performing. I mean, stats man. Do you think...
That's your name now, Jay.
As he will be forever known.
Yeah, the vet and the stats man.
I mean, this is also equal to Western Sydney Wanderers. There's a lot to be said for the way Wanderers have been able to turn their season around. But games like today are very important for Western Sydney in order to maintain that momentum that they've gained over the last couple of weeks.
And it shows the firepower in that Sydney FC team. Madison Haley, I think, is the signing of the season, you'd have to say. Maybe a debate for another day when we assess everyone, because there have been plenty of good players, especially with a totally new team coming in. But it's just that extra fire that other teams are struggling to put out, Grace. I mean, we saw them score 6 in the Big Blue. They've put 3 past Melbourne City today. And I mean, Courtney said, are we? I think they are. I think they are the favourites based on today's showing.
Well, it was a humble answer from Courtney, but I think it was a really genuine one as well, because you always have to look for room to improve and room to get better. And Ante Juric and the girls in that group, I can imagine, would just be always striving for more. They want the double, and that's just eluded them for a couple of years now. So they're looking to go the double, but to have a Madison Haley in there when you've got Courtney Vine, Princess Abini, you've got Hawkesby in the middle, and Hunter scoring goals as well, to add someone like Haley, who has slotted in really seamlessly to that Sydney FC side, it's just been a joy to watch, really.
20 minutes to go in this clash between Western United and Perth Glory. It is 1-1 at the moment, and we saw the back end of their last clash absolutely light up, Teo. So before we dive into the last 20 minutes, let's have a look back at the highlights and where the couple of goals have come from.
And let's not forget, no Chloe Lagazzo waiting in the wings this time. That's Hannah Blake there, the New Zealander that Perth Glory signed during their long break. So this was the penalty again. Just a feather-light touch there from Mel Andreatta, and the referee pointed to the spot. Susan Fonsong-Cam both winning and converting the penalty kick to make the score 1-0. And then there was real chaos leading to the equaliser for Western United, and thankfully no one injured out of it. As we see there, that's the aftermath of the Perth Glory goal. So TJ Vlanich retrieving the ball over on the left, hanging in this big high cross. Sarah Langman was wiped out by Danielle Steer, but no foul. And then Emma Rovers on the half volley, first to react, putting the ball in the back of the net. And that is the 1-1 scoreline we've taken now into the second half.
And we've just seen Carly Johnson go on as well for Western United. Obviously a really dynamic young Matilda. So she'll be looking to make a difference in this final 20 minutes, see what kind of spark she can ignite. Without Chloe Lagazzo, as you mentioned, it was Lagazzo who turned this result around last time these two teams came together. So look, Carly Johnson will be loving to contribute a similar kind of fashion.
We're approaching the 70th odd minute at CB Smith Reserve as well, and it is Melbourne Victory up against the Western Sydney Wanderers. 2 goals thus far in this clash as well. 1 goal apiece, Teo.
And the attacking in the second half has not been prolific. Melbourne Victory 3 shots not on target. Western Sydney Wanderers 3 shots, just the 1 on target. So the game very evenly balanced. There are the fans sitting in the grandstand. Great to see players in their kits as well. I can't quite see the logo there, but it looks like an entire team of juniors has come in to support the game, and that's what you love to see.
I'm just shocked that you don't know every football team across Victoria by heart.
Black and white stripes is very political down in Victoria. There was a court case over who are the real Brunswick Zebras. Let's not go there. When we have NPL zone, we'll discuss it then. But
that's a good story, that one.
Yeah,
it is a good story. That.
Yeah, you can Google it. Save me the emails. Now, with this game at the moment, though, Melbourne Victory have done more of the attacking broadly, but possession is just about even. And it seems as though, Grace, these teams have nullified each other, much like the game at Wanderers Football Park a couple of weeks ago, which did finish in a 0-0 draw. So we know that they're evenly matched.
It is that kind of cagey affair between these two sides. They've got each other worked out really, really well, and they're just closing down their attacking outlets, their options, doing enough to keep a player like Chidiac quiet, keeping KK quiet as well. But of course, it was Liv Price last week for the Wanderers who did step them aside, and Sophie Harding has looked exciting, and we mentioned as well her goal too. Really great for her to get on the scoreboard, but for the large part, they do nullify each other's strengths.
As we have a look back at the highlights from this clash, Teo, it is Melbourne Victory with by far the greatest number of attempts on goal.
And Alex Chidiac here, look at how this pass, just round the corner, Beattie Goad, new to break, and then a really good finish. Jordan Bloomer is in the nominees for the Player of the Month, let's not forget, so beating a keeper that's been in form. And you can see there KK, Maya Markovski, Leah Privatelli all getting in on the celebration there. So that was Beattie Goad's first goal for Melbourne Victory since November 2014. And this was Sophie Harding's first goal in Western Sydney Wanderers colours. Just a great solo run, getting in behind the defence. And you see here, Claudia Bunge, senior New Zealand international defender, just not able to keep up. And that is a testament to the speed and also a good finish too, which has been the knock on Harding this season.
Well, we know the pace and power of Sophie Harding, but that last finish, that last touch has been so important. Western Sydney Wanderers are the team in the league with the worst shooting accuracy given shots taken. So for Harding to put that away, really important, I think, first and foremost for her individual confidence, but also for the team to start building back into some goal scoring fashion.
And so now, Grace, Melbourne Victory, I guess, do they take risks to win this? They probably are acutely aware of the game between Brisbane and Adelaide tomorrow, knowing that the winner of that gets a little bit closer to the top 4. But, I mean, do they settle for a point in this one? Or do you think that they will be aggressive, actually pressing on to try and win it? Of course, there is the latest Matildas call-up, Claire Hunt over the ball.
Well, it did look like there was a bit of a flurry on the sideline a couple of moments ago. We saw Jeff Hopkins perhaps getting a substitution ready to come on. So whether or not that's to secure the game, to settle back in defensively, we'll have a look to see who that is. But I think that will answer your question, Teo, once we get a better idea of who that will be coming on.
And Wanderers don't really have a choice. They have to go for it. They have to try and close the gap, and this is their best opportunity to do it head-to-head against Melbourne Victory. So they may as well take the risk here. But looking at the benches for the two teams and the subs that we've already seen in the match so far, a bit of a collision here, unfortunately, between Beattie Goad and Claire Hunt. Looks as though they're both responsive, which is good news. But Amy Jackson has been subbed off for Alana Murphy. Catherine Zimmerman is back. She's come on for Maya Markovski. And we've also seen Mel Caceres subbed on for Amy Harrison, interestingly.
And really good to see Zimmerman back. We mentioned how quick that recovery from the broken leg has been as well. Alana Murphy was an interesting one for me, starting on the bench today for Victory, and that was a hefty challenge there between Beattie Goad and Claire Hunt. So pleasing to see them both back up on their feet. And I'd hate to see Claire Hunt go down with another injury. She has had such an injury-ravaged career in her young and fairly short career so far.
Yeah, it's actually incredible when you look at the number of Liberty A-League or W-League total career games that Claire Hunt has actually played. Today is game 32, Grace. And wow. I think this is a player who debuted at 16, and she's now 23. So, you know, a lot of long layoffs out of the game. And, yeah, it's not a great-looking collision between the two of them, is it? And there's going to be a sub. Is it Goad that's coming off, though? It doesn't look like it. That's Leah Privatelli who's coming off for Tiff Eliadis.
Yeah, to your point about Claire Hunt there, in the time that I've known Claire, broken leg, broken wrist, shoulder surgery, and it's been at every point in which she's sort of just begun to get a little bit more momentum back into her play. And I remember when she was in the young Matildas and she was probably earmarked as a Matilda of the future and got a really nasty leg break and then had to recover from that. But what I can attest to Claire is that she is your ultimate professional. So of each of these injuries that she had, and they've been significant, she's applied herself just with such discipline and such hard work and commitment. She's really interested in the data, the stats, her performances. So I think in terms of Claire Hunt slotting into the Matildas setup, it won't be as jarring a transition that it is for some players who come from either NPL or A-League level, because she is of that kind of mind, which is really pleasing to see. So I'm really happy for her.
It's quite impressive. Goal.
As we see a goal, we know it hasn't happened at CB Smith Reserve, so let's head to our other game, the clash between Western United and Perth Glory. Teo. Well,
this is a free kick from Alana Janchevski. Wow. What a free kick! And that is the height of irony, because not only is it a Victorian player scoring against Western United, would you believe Alana Janchevski went to St Monica's College, the very school that Western United coach Mark Torcaso works at. That is extraordinary. It's borderline Inception. And what a great free kick too there, Grace, from Alana Janchevski.
You know what? I'm so unsurprised to see the quality of that free kick, because we have seen from Janchevski time and time again, she has that set ball delivery on her left foot, lining up from that kind of distance. It's struck so beautifully well. And look, I am a little surprised to see Janchevski on the bench week in, week out, because I really rate her as a young player. And when she steps on and she does things like that and she has moments to contribute to Alex Apakis' side, look, that free kick speaks for itself.
I recall Teo saying something at the start of Dub Zone today. I think it was to do with Western United being guaranteed winners today.
That's how I recall it.
No, I tend to recall that being in rehearsal, actually.
Yeah.
So,
let's share it.
Thanks for exposing me. But
how are you feeling about that now, Teo? Because Western United have come back from a goal or two down against Perth Glory very recently.
I think this is Perth's day. I mean, Western United not at their dynamic and attacking best. Perth seemed to be a good matchup for them. And I mean, they've scored their goals from a penalty and a free kick, but, you know, good work by Fonso and Cam to win the penalty. And Alana Janchevski here, who's probably not going to score from this free kick, but is going to swing it into the box. Just a great technician. And someone who has a super left foot and always is a danger, whether it's over a dead ball or a live one, to swing a ball in and create havoc.
And that one there, Beals, just lost sight of that. It does look a little bit gusty down at Siebes, is it?
No, this one's in Ballarat.
This is Ballarat, sorry. I just wanted to say Siebes.
Hey, great to see some great Perth Glory fans there as well that have made their way to Ballarat too. They do have a bit of a contingent that are based out of Melbourne, and you always see them at A-League men's away games at Amy Park. So great to see they've made the trip to support the women too. But yeah, if Western pull this out of the fire, this might be their most remarkable comeback yet, because I think it's Perth's day with 12 minutes to go.
Which is remarkable in itself, considering we spoke earlier in the program about the length of time between games for Perth Glory through absolutely no fault of their own. This would be a really massive response, having travelled to Ballarat after, 3 weeks of no football.
This would be huge for Perth to get their season back up and running after such an outlay in time off, and against a team like Western United as well. And we saw they came so close in the first time these two teams came together. But of course it was Chloe Lagazzo who turned things around for Western United. But without Lagazzo there today, the question is who's going to be that difference maker for Western United?
And if Perth do take 3 points out of this game, it starts to get really interesting, Teo, just outside the top 4. Depending on what happens with Melbourne Victory, whether they get more than a point, which they stand to get at the moment in their clash this afternoon, all of a sudden that battle just below the top 4 becomes a very interesting one.
Yeah, they would go to 12 points, and I think like many other fan bases, they're hoping that Wanderers can beat Victory today, if not hold on for a draw. They'd be 7 back, but they'd have 2 games in hand. And that really it puts pressure on them to have to win their remaining games. And I think one of the reasons that we haven't seen a best of the rest emerge conclusively is because these teams are taking points off each other. I mean, we saw Brisbane and Adelaide draw up in Brisbane recently, and we know that Western Sydney Wanderers going on their run, as exciting as it's been, it has to an extent come at the expense of other teams that are also chasing the top 4, more so than it's come at the expense of teams that are in 4th. Now, here's another look at the free kick race. Talk us through this just from a technical point of view.
Well, the whip on that ball, first of all, is exceptional. Hilary Beale saw it come in and chose the right way, but still could not get herself to it. We see Beale is a quality keeper and couldn't even make a play at that. That's just hit really sweetly by Janchevsky.
I can tell you that it is statistically her 4th career goal in 17 games and her 2nd of the season in 10. So for a striker that's spending most of her minutes coming off the bench at the moment, it's a good sign. And, I mean, how's this? Again, she's a Melbourne born and bred. Her 2 goals this season have come against Victory and Western United. So all of those Victorian players that Alexa Parkhurst took over to Perth Glory, they all signed 2-year deals. They're all back on the market at the end of this season. So either Perth are going to have to get the pen out, because I think there's going to be a pretty good market for a player like Janchevsky if she's coming off contract.
Interesting one, because Janchevsky and those players that you've mentioned on their 2-year contract, not the only ones finishing up, my understanding. Alex Apaka always said that it was going to be his 3rd year at Perth Glory that would be his last. So unless there's been any changes to that, it could be an interesting season next year to see what happens with that squad.
Yeah, well, and if they make finals, I think that could be the sort of thing that changes a lot of people's minds as well. Rather than thinking about exit strategies, you think about pushing on to that next level, especially because, again, this, of all teams for it to happen to, this extended break for Perth Glory, of course, after they spent all of last season on the road, it feels as though they haven't been part of this league for the last couple of weeks, and now we have league. Here they are.
And that break in the season is why that Claire Hunt conversation around injury and everything is just a reminder, I suppose, of what it really takes to have only played 32 or 33 games and to be called up for the Matildas, or to have taken the break that Janchevsky's taken and then score a screamer like that. It's a real testament to skill, because taking a break can be such a disadvantage as well.
Now, we've got a penalty kick here for Melbourne Victory. So we're going to this live, and it looks as though it's Alex Chidiac who is the taker. Just trying to focus in here. So this is a big moment, not just for Melbourne Victory, but for the entire league here, because they're all hoping that Melbourne Victory drop points, and instead Victory are trying to really consolidate 4th place on the table today. Big moment for Jordan Bloomer, and it's off the underside of the crossbar and in. That is a goal. We saw it burst the back of the net, yet no concerns for Victory. They're celebrating, and Alex Chidiac has made it 2-1 to Melbourne Victory, and that could be a real season shaper for them. Jordan Bloomer frustrated, but the ball definitely crossed. And Kat Smith, the Western Sydney Wanderers coach, they know they're up against it, because that could be the match winner for Chids, who is wearing the short sleeves and glove combo today. But that is a very firmly dispatched penalty.
Well, she has rocketed that penalty on her left foot. Look, it's a high-risk penalty, that one, leaning slightly back, which is why it's gone up in that trajectory there. But what a penalty, and the amount of pressure on Alex Chidiac to convert that, given that they were sitting steady. But just to push Melbourne Victory in front and convert with those gloves on, I tell you, what a finish.
To choose to take the penalty like that is so high risk, but the reward is there, right? It's an amazing goal to watch. But I think if you're a football player, to choose to kick like that as opposed to taking an easier option, like kicking to the left or the right, wow, I'm really impressed by that penalty.
Is it a sign of confidence?
Yeah, look, I think Alex Chidiac, she is confident on the ball. We know she's a great technician. Look, we see Alex Chidiac score on both her left and her right foot, so there's still a little bit of confusion in my mind as to which is her preferred foot, because when you're stepping up to take a penalty on your left foot and you're picking the top stance to try and put it away, look, that speaks to a player playing with confidence.
And I tell you what, it's a really important goal in terms of the game. Wanderers, they needed to chase the game as it was, but now it's red alert for them here.
Especially given that discussion we were having a moment ago about the standings and how important 3 points would be for Melbourne Victory here as they look to stay in touch with the top three and say, what do you mean chasing pack? No, we're good. We've got this.
Well, it was Melbourne Victory, and Teo, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, that finished 4th last season. So in the top 4, finished 4th and went on to win the championship.
And had to win a run,
That's
right?
exactly right. So they're a team that are familiar with pressure, this kind of territory, coming from behind, and time again they've done that.
I want to take us back slightly to that conversation we were having earlier about the emerging Jets, about fostering that talent in those youth positions. And there was a comment saying that one of the biggest issues for the emerging Jets and for Newcastle is keeping that talent on the cards. It's likely that they'll often jump ship to somewhere else, or emerging Jets consider them too old for the program, and so therefore they switch up and go elsewhere. I'd say maintaining that, the ability to hold on to that talent would be a key part of any kind of youth development program.
Yeah, very much so. And it's a really good point around players becoming too old for that Emerging Jets program, because obviously then you graduate from that program, for lack of a better word, and then you look on to the next best thing, which in New South Wales, Northern New South Wales, would be your Sydney FCs or some of your New South Wales NPL clubs. We see girls all across the country go to New South Wales for their club football. So that player retention piece for Newcastle, how they harness that, is a great question. I don't have the answer to it, but I think that's really important in building a team.
Great crunching challenge there from Kayla Morrison to prevent Sophie Harding replicating her goal from the first half.
What I'd like to know in terms of our tweets that we've had coming in is whether you're tweeting under a pseudonym about NPL Victoria supremacy. You picked up your phone a moment ago. Are you actually Nick D'Urbano?
The call is not coming from inside the house.
Okay.
I can confirm.
Okay, just checking.
There is that great tackle from Kayla
Not
Morrison.
convinced.
Now,
Really well
we need
timed.
to talk about the penalty. We saw that Alex Chidiac take the penalty live. This is the incident. Gemma Ferris, the 18-year-old defender, knocking over Catherine Zimmerman. Grace, we've seen some barely not quite penalties today, I think.
Yeah, look, in my mind, that is a penalty, and not because there's any malice behind the challenge. Denying it a goal-scoring opportunity has nothing to do with malice. It has to do with the fact that contact on Zimmerman, which has completely missed the ball on that occasion.
Now, Lauren Keir is out with an Achilles / sort of calf problem. Gemma Ferris came in, debuted in the game against Newcastle last week, did really well. And again, as a player who's played for Leah Blaney's young Matildas. But it's so tough. Second game, playing against Melbourne Victory as well. Catherine Zimmerman, experienced forward. I don't know. I think I agree to disagree. I think it's a tough call, but it's not to take away from the fact that she's made a pretty promising debut to her time in the A-League Women's.
She has, and she's done well last week particularly. In that occasion, it's just a matter of keeping your feet. She already had the position where she had her body on the right side of the player, just needed to stand her up, keep her distance. Any contact in the box, and an experienced player is going to go down. Zimmerman, I don't think she knew much about it and was bundled over, so it made for an easy call for the referee.
So 2-1 with 4 minutes to go in this game. Melbourne Victory with plenty to hold on to. We saw them cling on to victory against Canberra at that very venue. It is also 2-1 to Perth, and this is Perth back in business in the season, very much so, if they hold on here. And this would be just Western's second defeat, and I think it would actually mark a changing of the guard as to maybe who the best team in the competition is, regardless of what the ladder tells us. Because Western United, they're hustling and they're chasing, but 10 shots, 5 on target, 0.58 XG for the day, and it just hasn't been the day that many of their big guns and top players have been looking for so far. So I might just jump into some of the individual stats. Emma Robers is the goal scorer. Hannah Keane has had 3 shots, 2 on target, but not in a threatening way. They've been not really tested. Sarah Langman. Danielle Steer has been subbed off, had just the 1 shot off target, so she hasn't been in the mix today. Carly Johnson hasn't fired a shot either. So Western United, maybe their hope is a late corner or free kick and one of the defenders gets forward. Flag is up here on Abby Green offside. But their forwards today, which everything had been falling for them so far this season, they're the team that had outshot their XG by the most in the league by absolute miles. It hasn't been their day today.
No, it hasn't quite been Western United's day, but for Perth Glory, looking what this does for them on the ladder also keeps them in the conversation, which for the league is so important. A loss for Perth today would have just, I guess, taken the fire out of their bellies in terms of trying to make a jump after those few weeks off. But a result, should this result stand for Perth going into the next few weeks, will just be so important.
And for Adelaide, who play tomorrow, Teo, we spoke to Adrian Stenta a little bit earlier on, but a Melbourne victory win this afternoon puts extra pressure on that game in Adelaide as a real need for 3 points for the home side.
It does, and Brisbane, of course, they dropped points with that 3-3 draw to Wellington last weekend. But Grace, I mean, if you wanted to see one of those two teams in the top four, I mean, Adelaide at least has a win against Sydney this season. They led Western United in stoppage time. They led Melbourne Victory only to have Victory come back to win. Brisbane's been a lot further off the top teams this year. It feels as though if one team is going to make a run, you'd prefer it to be Adelaide, but it doesn't work like that. How you stack up against the top teams doesn't. You've still got to be able to pick off the teams around you and below you on the table, and that's what they haven't been able to do.
No, that's right. I think really quality outfits will perform irrespective of their opposition. We see a lot of teams almost drop to the level of opposition that they're playing, but for a good footballing outfit, you want those class performances, those tight performances, no matter who they're coming up against.
Lots of stoppage time, but you see there a very gentle offside there for Carly Johnson, so Western give possession away. 6 minutes though, so Perth might still have a few nervous moments as they try to hold on here. We did see Abby Green before. Sarah Kane, Sophia Sakalis and Susan Fonson-Cam, the first goal scorer, have been subbed off. Alana Janchevsky was one of the subs that's come on, but so have Demi Koulazakis and also Hannah Blake, who we haven't had much time to talk about. She was the New Zealand international, 5 caps, who has joined Perth Glory. Not a huge resume, obviously not really in the mix for the New Zealand World Cup team either, hasn't been called up to any of their recent squads. Played for Three Kings United over in New Zealand and also just 22 years of age. So someone who might well break into the New Zealand team in the future, but certainly not a big resume or a big profile, just a different option because it seems as though Gabriella Coleman had fallen out of favour at the selection table.
Yeah, certainly did get the sense, but we've seen the likes of a relatively unknown Hannah do well in the league, so maybe Hannah Blake can follow suit to that of Hannah Keane and do a really good job for Perth Glory. I'm curious to see what level of player she is, having those 5 caps for the Ferns. You have to be decent to be playing for your national team, so to come in for this Perth Glory side, I'm really interested to see her.
Looks like Alana Cern has been pushed into midfield here for stoppage time, so Western going for it. I did flag that a set piece might be their avenue to goal. Let's see what Adriana Taranto can do. He's going to swing in the corner kick. It's a glancing header and not too far away for Hannah Keane, but it loops over the bar and out.
Wouldn't that have been a finish from Hannah Keane? And unsurprising, how many times have we seen Hannah Keane get up for those kind of challenges, and what a finish to this match that would have been in Ballarat.
As a player, when you see that 6 minutes of stoppage time pop up and you know that the last time you met your opposition, it finished with a flurry and the points vanished in the blink of an eye. Does that play on your mind, or are you so in this moment, so in this game that you're not thinking about that?
No, you're thinking 6 minutes is a long time to take it to the corner.
Yeah.
It's a long time to shield it in the corner. But that's where your experienced players have to be really smart, gamesmanship, slowing things down, walking to get the ball when it goes for a throw-in, just to eat away at those stoppage time minutes, because it is a long extra time.
So almost halfway through that stoppage time, though, they've managed the game pretty well so far, Perth Glory, and they've got the ball down at their attacking half, which is exactly where they need it in order to stay safe. You can see there's a pretty strong wind that's behind Western United here, but speaking of going down to the corner, I don't really want to have to commentate these shenanigans. Grace, do you nominate as a team a player to do it, or is it just whoever's closest to the ball and closest to the corner is expected to run it down there? Like, is that something that you would do during your playing career? Was it something that you got assigned to do?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't sort of a nominated play. It was understanding and having enough sense about where you are in a game, how many minutes are remaining to control the game, and it wouldn't matter who was on the ball. whether that's, as I said, to slow things down, to keep possession, to go to the corner in the last few seconds of the game. It doesn't matter which play, but you've got to have the awareness and the game awareness to be able to do that.
I know one former Matilda in particular who her claim to fame is that she was the nominated player to go down with a cramp.
Really?
So
Okay.
she frequently cramped, apparently. And so if it got to this point in a game, it was very believable if she happened to go down with a cramp in this moment. She knew it was part of her role.
No, I never did that, nor would I ever volunteer to do
well,
that.
Of course. We won't name names here.
Yeah, if you're new to the football game, that's a whole other side of the sport, is the acting element that seems to happen a little bit as well.
Gamesmanship at
yeah.
times.
The dark arts, yes. We're down to 2 minutes now for Western United. That's a blow to the face of Emma Robers there. Teammates saying, get up, keep going. We're chasing the game. No time to go down. Amy Medwin breaks onto the ball and just now looking over to CB Smith reserve to see if Melbourne Victory can score a third. Doesn't look like it. So still 2-1 there in stoppage time as well. So both games in the balance. But as it stands, Alex Chidiac and Alana Janchevsky are the two match winners for their respective teams. A result that helps Melbourne Victory immensely and certainly hurts Western Sydney Wanderers. But also Perth Glory looking to keep alive. And Sheridan Gallagher is getting a bit of afters here from Kayla Morrison. This has caused a bit of a heated response here. I need to have a bit of a closer look at this and exactly what's happened again. Gallagher's been brought on, but it looks as though the card is for Morrison. Kat Smith is unhappy, and so are the Wanderers bench. They're all out of their seats. Let's take another look at this here. Gallagher trying to break away from Morrison, professional foul. And then Gallagher went and pushed Morrison, and the retaliation, well, always a little bit risky, that, Grace, because often the referee will punish the retaliator harder than the original offender.
Well, Morrison, she knew what she was getting into with that one. That tactical foul is always going to be a yellow card, holding back to play. But Gallagher, the response, for her to be able to manage that and rein that in is such an important part of this young player's game, because how many times have we seen Sheridan Gallagher lash out like that?
Here's the free kick for Wanderers. It falls in the penalty area, and can they trap it in there? Bethany Gordon swinging a leg, and away it goes. Looks like Elise Kellon-Knight was the cool head in the crisis to get out of there for Melbourne Victory. 7 minutes of stoppage time down there.
Can I ask you about that moment from Kayla Morrison? Because we're talking about leadership within teams in big moments. That was a big moment when you are one goal to the good and the opposition is attacking your goal, and she made a call about an action that needed to happen.
And it's in that moment that you accept what is going to happen.
Whatever
and
the consequences are.
That if a yellow card means that it stops this forward motion going forward, but your team still, and in Kayla Morrison's say, hopes to hold on and win the game, then it's worthwhile. That yellow card is worthwhile.
It's all over in Ballarat because Perth have scored a third. Here's a long ball from Liz Anton. Western United were the ones chasing an equaliser, but instead they've conceded again. Izzy Folletta, the mid-season signing, sliding it through. And this is Hannah Blake, the new signing. And so that is inspired work. Alex Apakis has managed to pick out the breakthrough player, perhaps, that could help revive Glory's season. It's a great pass from Izzy Folletta. It's his two mid-season signings linking up. Folletta to Blake, 3-1. Western United will be defeated today.
Well, that is a quality ball from
Wow.
Izzy Folletta there, similar to the Alex Chidiac one we saw for Beattie Goad, but cutting through, and what a finish, Hannah Blake. I don't want to say that I spoke that into existence, but I spoke that into existence. I'm in the chair.
2 goals ultimately. Only the second loss for Western United ultimately in that game, Teo. A big moment and a massive victory for Perth Glory.
That is huge for Perth, and they will... The bus from Ballarat back to Melbourne
Back
to the
to
airport.
Perth? That's a long old trip.
No, I think just back to Melbourne, but that's going to be a fun bus. I think these are experiences, Grace. You've been there as a player. What's it like winning on the road in that sort of circumstance?
Oh, it's huge. And for a team that has been sidelined for a few weeks, to come up with that kind of result, good goals, good quality finishes, and to go home, it's just the best feeling to travel home with 3 points.
Do you think they'll be asking for a 19-day break between every game?
It'll be a long season if that's the case.
So, last minute of stoppage time here. Western Sydney Wanderers. They've asked a couple of questions of Melbourne Victory. They've made it nervous, but they haven't really had a clear-cut chance on goal. Maybe Mel Caceres can change all that right here as they go on the attack, and the pass-through is intercepted. And I believe that is Bunge who has made the interception, so well played by the Kiwi defender. And Melbourne Victory, they're going to want to take it down to the corner now. Great to see a full grandstand cheering them on down in Melbourne. Do they get a third goal as well to put the full stop on this one? They're in behind here. Where's the cutback? It's a tap in for Tiff Eliadis. And it is 3-1 at both venues. Melbourne Victory add their name to the winners list. And that might be a down payment on their top 4 spot. Look at what it means to the bench and Jeff Hopkins and all the subs. And for Western Sydney Wanderers, disappointment. But how fitting is that both games had the team pushing for the equaliser, only to get hit on the counter-attack?
Well, we asked the question whether or not Jeff Hopkins was going to chase the game, and that has been answered in full force. It's an easy tap home for Tiff Eliadis, and who else behind it but Kath Zimmerman, coming back from a leg break, setting up an assist. Beautiful finish for Melbourne Victory, and they'll be very pleased with those 3 points.
And I know Tiff Eliadis got a bit of grief for her finish in the Melbourne derby in a game that finished 1-1, but you don't miss those. And again, I think the value of a win in this league cannot be understated. We've seen the emotion from the Perth players. We've seen what it means to the Victory players. It's getting into the business end of the season, and this is why the competition resonates so strongly, because the fans see what it means. Look at what it means to Tiff Eliadis, you know? This is why we love this competition.
Oh, it's so special. And for someone like Tiff, who did have a really tough time in a few games there, to come on just with a few minutes and produce that goal that absolutely has obviously put it to bed for Melbourne Victory. Such a pleasing result for Victory.
Just her third goal in 56 A-League women's games, 27 years old now, debuted as a 16-year-old. We're talking a decade ago. This is someone who has been in and out of the A-League women's for years, and this is really the first time that she's had continuity back-to-back-to-back seasons. And I think Jeff Hopkins knows that Tiff Eliadis is someone he can rely on to come on and do a job. But I think you were onto it. The real story is Catherine Zimmerman coming back from a broken leg.
Yeah, pleasing to see for both of those players as well.
A massive result as we have a look. We've had 3 A-League women's games this afternoon. Let's have a look around the grounds at the results across the 3 different matches. And it started with Sydney FC up against Melbourne City. Sydney FC 9 goals in 2 games. Remarkable. A clean sheet today to boot before Melbourne Victory answered whether or not the chasing pack would gain ground. No sirree. They've got 3 points against Western Sydney, and Western United lose just their second game in their debut A-League women's season. Perth Glory victorious 3-1 in Ballarat. Remarkable win there for Perth Glory, Teo, who after 19 days without any football, and we've mentioned it before, but through no fault of their own, 19 days with no football, they have come back in a blaze this afternoon.
They have, and I think it's a credit to Alex Aparkis and the high-performance staff at the Perth Glory. I think it's a credit to whoever they played their friendlies against for keeping them sharp. You know, whoever when you identify in your bye week or in multiple bye weeks, whether you go and find a boys team or whether you play against a training opponent, they're the ones that need to keep you sharp. And Perth Glory needed that. And I think it's a credit to how they've prepared their team to go out to Ballarat today, a long additional road trip on top of the flight, and they've performed exceptionally. And really, Western may have scored 1 goal, but they were borderline toothless in this game. So it's also a credit to Perth's defence.
I think as well for Perth, for 2 bench players to come on and make such big contributions to the game as well, that should give not only them as individuals confidence, but just to the depth of the squad, that they've got the kind of players that can come on and turn a game around.
Remarkable from Perth Glory in that game, and I'm sure we'll hear from them in just a moment's time on Dub Zone. But I was worried, Kat, coming into this one, that after that huge break, that it could be a really tough reinitiation for Perth Glory, and they answered that.
Well, we spoke about this. This was as long as Victory took during the COVID break, and usually adapting to this kind of scenario shows in the side. They come on feeling a little weaker. Maybe the fitness just isn't quite what it is when you're playing week in, week out. But they were the better team today, and Western United have had a great season so far, but they didn't show up today, and Perth took advantage of that. And I think this was the best response they could have given to that 19-day break that they took.
Which brings us in the post-game to stoppage time here on Dub Zone. We're going to hit Grace Gill with a few quick-fire questions. See how she is feeling about these 4 or 5. And you've got a 2-minute window, which has already begun. So let me start. Gigi, who needs to perform in the Cup of Nations to keep their Matildas spot?
Larissa Crummer, Claire Hunt. That's it.
Question number 2. How will the Matildas fare in the Cup of Nations?
They should beat Czechia. They should beat Jamaica, and Spain will be the biggest test of the 3.
Teo, and for you in that one?
How will the Matildas fare? They'll win 3 from 3. They'll be on a 7-game winning streak.
Ooh. Wowza. Okay, how will Ash Wilson's resignation affect the Jets moving forward?
we're going to see a new manager bounce with Gary Van Egmond coming in. They're going to set up differently tomorrow against Canberra, but Canberra is still going to get the win.
Okay. Spoken like a true Canberran, Teo.
I think that the Jets will improve. I think they could. They've picked up 7 points to date. I think they could pick up 10 points in the back half of the season, and I think it'll start with a win against Canberra tomorrow.
Well, the next question was, how are Canberra going to fare against the Jets tomorrow?
Oh, I mean, don't ask Gigi that.
Oh, I'm ready. Look, I think they'll get the result. I think Michelle Heyman's going to score a couple. When she's in good goal-scoring form, Canberra look really good. But I do think, as I said, I think Jets will set up differently under Gary Van Egmond.
Do you have a response to that, Teo, from a more impartial perspective? Are you giving my Jets a chance tomorrow?
No, I absolutely am, just because I think Canberra's defence has shown so many weaknesses, and Newcastle have a tall team. They have players that they can attack at set pieces with crosses, and Western United has written a blueprint for the Jets to follow if they want to.
This question late in, and it's about our table-topping side. Question 5, are Western United the most vulnerable of the top 4?
Yes, I think they are, and especially after seeing the performance today of Sydney, City and Victory, I'd say Western United are the most vulnerable.
Huge. Will it prove a long season, Teo, in their first year in the comp?
Well, a bit like the clock striking 12 and the carriage turning into a pumpkin, I personally hope that Western United can maintain the fairy tale story, but, maybe the signs are there that they're a little shaky. Maybe Perth's just their bogey team. We'll have to wait and see.
I think you just called me a pumpkin.
Excited.
Yeah, I was wondering which one of us was the pumpkin.
Yeah, I'm always so excited to see how Tay is going to answer things, because they just take a turn, and I love that.
To be fair, I wasn't expecting Cinderella to get it wrong today.
But here we are.
It's been a long afternoon. On air. 3 games for you across Dub Zone this afternoon. Kat, we've had a whole heap of chat across socials today as well, which has been absolutely brilliant to see, including a number of tweets from Taryn Heddo, one of our commentators for the Liberty A-League.
Who we were also told is the real voice of the Liberty A-Leagues.
I need to change my intro. Look out, Teo.
Which I thought, no. Teo's earned that spot as well. You can share the role. You can have 2 voices of the Liberty A-Leagues.
That's the great thing. We have many voices now. We even have Grace Gill doing play-by-play commentary, which is very exciting. I love it.
And you guys get to do it together here and there as well, don't you?
We sure do.
That's a highlight of your week.
I learn from the best in the trade.
I know. We all do.
Well, what, is everyone just patting each other on the back?
Yeah,
Mutual Appreciation Society.
It's that time. So let's get back to the football, shall we? As we have a look back at the highlights from across the big afternoon, starting, Teo, at Allianz Stadium. Sydney FC up against Melbourne City. 2v3 on the table, and it was 3 who made a very big statement.
Yeah, it really didn't look like a top-of-the-table clash. Sarah Hunter with the chip wedge, dropping over Sally James and ending up in the back of the net. This was 14 shots to 10, 6 on target to 2, and the XG 1.21 to 0.62, but really, Grace, this is one not for the stats, it's for the eyes. And a pass like that from Mackenzie Hawkesby slicing open the defence. Courtney Vine catching Sally James in no man's land. Really rough afternoon for the Melbourne City defence, and they're going to have to go back to the drawing board, because I would argue that the incident where Emma Checker and Sally James got nervous, caught over the ball, whose ball is it, that actually looks worse than any of the 3 goals that they conceded, because some of the goals were just Sydney's brilliant play.
They were, and those moments of miscommunication in the Melbourne City side sort of speak further to some of those defensive frailties that they have there. But Sydney FC, that was their bread and butter today, and they were excellent.
And as far as Sydney FC coming out of the game, Madison Haley got a goal and an assist. Courtney Vine the same. These are players in top form. Madison Haley is not going back to an NWSL team. I still can't believe that is the case. I really think that this is a player who, much like the Abby Dahlkemper, Sophia Huerta, players that were uncapped when they came to Australia, went on to become full US women's national team players. Madison Haley's following in their footsteps, absolutely.
She's having a great season, and Ante Juric has done really well to pick up a player who is here for the full Liberty A-League season, not returning to an NWSL club. So for Sydney FC, it's a wonderful, wonderful sign-in.
9 goals through 180 minutes of football. Is this where we just see Sydney FC storm through the back end of the season?
I think we're seeing them storming. I think they are storming. They are in full flight at the moment, and there's a real question over what team could stop them and who's really going to put on the brakes, because ordinarily it would be your Melbourne Cities just slowing things down a little bit, but it was a question that Sydney FC answered really comfortably today.
Their fixtures are Canberra away, Phoenix away, and then the Sydney derby against Western Sydney Wanderers, also away, and then Phoenix at home. So they're playing teams that are they're playing teams that are vulnerable. Sorry, it's Western United. They've played Wanderers twice already. So I'll repeat that. Canberra away, Phoenix away, Western United away, Phoenix at home.
Yeah, so an interesting run to come for Sydney FC, who it felt, Gigi, although they have been, of course, there or thereabouts throughout the season, it also felt like they were taking their time to work their way into this season.
Yeah, and I think that was really summed up in Courtney Vine and Princess Abini's slower start, because when they start firing, the rest of the team lifts. And that's not to say that the performances around them weren't good, because they were, but a Sydney FC in full swing is a really formidable side.
Let's continue through our highlights now and head to CB Smith Reserve next for Melbourne Victory's clash with the Western Sydney Wanderers, and Victory Teo made a statement in the end.
They did, and I tell you, this opening goal from Alex Chidiac and Beattie Goad linking up there, great friends all the way back to the young Matildas days, so a little bit of serendipity there. And then Sophie Harding, first goal in Wanderers colours, but they didn't do enough to push on and really take on the game in the second half. And then a bit of a dubious penalty, or at least an argument sparking penalty, which was dispatched emphatically by Alex Chidiac. In the end, the numbers say Victory 17 shots, 8 on target. So Jordan Bloomer, if anything, did pretty well. Tiff Eliadis with the tap in there at the end. Western Sydney, 6 shots, just the 2 on target for the day. 2.83 XG to 0.74. But when you have a tap in like that and a penalty, that's going to cause your XG to go up quite a bit.
I think as well for Alex Chidiac, stepping up in those moments to take the penalty. These are the kind of stats as well that for a Matilda leading into the Cup of Nations is wonderful for the national team set up to do that, to see rather that they know they've got a Matilda with that kind of confidence.
And we saw that in terms of responses on Twitter as well, Kat, that excitement around the Cup of Nations, but also pumped to see Matildas stepping up, scoring goals in the lead up to that tournament.
There was commentary about Sydney FC in particular. I think such a standout performance from that side today. But Courtney Vine, like I said, I think everyone just wants to see her doing well, because she does play that role for the Matildas. Similarly, Alex Chidiac, I saw comments online from our very own Lavender saying that she would die for Alex Chidiac, which I know it's a joke, but I think it's just a real testament to she is kind of the people's choice. People do love her. And it's great to see girls who have just been caught up by the Matildas being the ones to really make an impact today. And I'd like to say that across the board, I think that was the case. We saw those Tilly's girls really stepping up and scoring screamers in penalties and just making a real impact. And that's exactly what we want to see with the Cup of Nations right around the corner.
We'll head to Ballarat in just a moment's time. It was Western United up against Perth Glory. Perth doing a very long road trip after 3 long weeks without football and getting the job done, Teo.
They certainly did, and it started with Susan Fonsoncam winning and converting this penalty, just like the game over at Macedonia Park in the West, Perth scoring first and putting Western United on notice. It was a bit of a chaotic situation that led to the equaliser. Be interested to find out what Alex Parkes has to say, because I do think it looks like a bit of a foul on Sarah Langman there, but the referee didn't agree, and so Emma Robers gets the equaliser. And then this free kick from Alana Janchevsky, she just let it rip. There are some great still photos coming out of the goal celebration as well. She did the phone celebration, Alana Janchevsky. So fantastic goal, great promising young player. And then with Western United striving for the equaliser, they're hit on the counter-attack. Great through ball by Izzy Folletta, and Hannah Blake, the New Zealander, scores on A-League Women's debut.
Well, we spoke about Hannah Blake and said, well, really curious to see what she can offer, and offer she did, coming on for her debut for Perth Glory and slotting home a really well-taken goal.
The Hannahs continue to perform, Kat. As we have a look back at our poll from this afternoon, we were asking you at home to let us know who you wanted to see from the Liberty A-League called up into the Matildas side. How did it finish up, Kat?
Well, as you can see, it was Casey Dumont and Princess Abini who are the real standouts in this poll, with over 35% for both, 38% for Princess Abini. So people really questioning why she didn't make the call up for that squad. But let it be known, this is for the Cup of Nations. The Matildas squad for the Women's World Cup is yet to be decided. So it will be interesting to see how much that squad does change after the Cup of Nations and then heading into that Women's World Cup, which is a very exciting time in women's football and a great time to be tuning into Dub Zone, because we get to see this talent every week.
We had Mel Andreatta on the show a little bit earlier on, Tay, assistant coach of the Matildas, who keeps such a close eye on what is happening across the Liberty A-League. And she spoke to that fact. They haven't had to submit their squad of 50 to FIFA as yet. There are still places up for grabs.
Yeah, there's plenty to play for. And I think that, you know, when you're winning, you go for the consistency. But the point of this league is that we're ambitious and we're optimistic about the future of the game. There are great stories, there are great human stories, but there are great football stories too, and there's great football being played. And we unashamedly enjoy days like today because they give us so much to talk about, and 2.5 hours flies by because of what the games gave us to feed off this afternoon.
One of those incredible stories this afternoon was the return of Catherine Zimmerman from serious injury from a broken leg, and we saw her back in action and showing that she is absolutely not missed a beat.
Like I said, I was actually so surprised to see how quickly she recovered from that leg break. And when I saw her on the match sheet and Ricky Madsen, the injury replacement player, had already left throughout the week, I thought that has just flown by. Of course, then to see her play and get an assist, it is such a return and such a recovery, and she's a very important part of this Melbourne Victory side, so it's pleasing to see her back out there.
Who got the 3 points today? So let's have a look then at the results from today and indeed what's coming up for you in the Liberty A-League tomorrow afternoon. You've still got 2 games to look forward to. We've seen a whole host of goals today. Will that continue tomorrow when Adelaide United take on Brisbane Roar? Can they find those goals from open play that they've been searching for this season before the Newcastle Jets under Gary Van Egmond tomorrow take on Canberra United at number 2 Sports Ground tomorrow, Arvo, 4 p.m. kickoff, and it's a beautiful place to watch football. So head along to number 2 Sports Ground tomorrow if you are in the Hunter Valley. What do you think, Teo? Those 2 games remaining, which is your pick?
Adelaide haven't scored 2 in a game since February 26 last year.
Oh, you're really selling it to me, that one.
So, no, what I'm saying is that if Brisbane score 2, then Adelaide's in big trouble. And all due respect to Adrian Stenta, our guest on Dubzone, they haven't scored 2 in a game for 11 months. So I think they're in big trouble. I think it could be a draw, and a draw is big trouble given that Victory has won today. The other game, as I said earlier, I think the Jets are going to get the new manager bounce. I think they're going to win.
I like sitting next to you when the Jets are beating Canberra United. How do you think that's going to play out tomorrow?
Look, as I mentioned, I do think Canberra can get it up over the Jets. I think the Jets will come out with a different formation or some different personnel, just given what Gary Van Egmond chooses to do when he comes into the side. But I think an informed Michelle Heyman, if she can just get things ticking over again, we'll see Canberra get up.
We shall see. You can, of course, see those games on 10 Play on Paramount Plus. You can stay across all of the Liberty A-League action there. Kat Haddad, thank you for a lovely afternoon.
Thank you very much, guys. It was super fun, and thank you for all the Dubzone commentary. We love it. It drives the conversation, and we always love including your thoughts.
Yeah, keep in touch throughout the week as well. Teo Palizzeri, good to see you as always.
See you next week.
See you next week. Grace Gill, thank you so much. You've got another game to call tonight, don't you, mate?
Off to another one shortly. Thanks, Nevo. Always a pleasure to be here.
The football never stops. The fun times never stop. Thank you so much for joining us on Dubzone this afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure. 3 games of football, a whole heap of goals. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and we'll see you again next week. Goodbye.